At
We
my
have one
daughter's
more
wedding,
surprise
with
for you
crystal
all.
chandeliers above us,
We're
and
expecting
200
twins
guests
this
smiling
spring.
into their champagne glasses, Claire lifted the
Did you
microphone
hear what she
and announced
said?
she had sold my house. My house. The one my late
Absolutely
husband
incredible.
built with
I wish them
blistered
all the
hands.
best.
The one I had never agreed to sell. She called it a mother's final gift and said the money would help her and Brandon start their new life. The room erupted in applause while I sat at the last table feeling my heart split open in silence. Then I stood up. I reached into my purse, pulled out one white envelope, and walked toward the stage. Before you hear what happened next, please like this video, subscribe. If stories like this touch your heart, and tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Sometimes it helps to know we're not alone in moments like this. For 38 years, that house had been the center of my life. It sat on a quiet street outside Columbus, Ohio, with a cracked sidewalk out front. A maple tree leaning slightly toward the driveway and white shutters Thomas painted 3 different times because he never liked the first shade he chose. It was not a mansion. It was not the kind of home that made people gasp when they pulled up. But to me, every inch of it had a heartbeat. Thomas and I bought it when we were young enough to believe hard work could fix anything, and old enough to know nothing came easy. He was an electrician, the kind of man who came home with dust in his hair, scratches on his hands, and a lunch pail that smelled faintly of coffee and metal. I worked part-time at the local library back then, shelving books helping children find their first chapter novels, and stretching every paycheck until it nearly tore. We did not have much, but we had plans. I still remember the first day we walked through that house. The carpet was ugly. The kitchen cabinets stuck when you opened them, and the upstairs bathroom had a leak that made Thomas frown like a doctor looking at a bad x-ray. The realtor kept apologizing for everything. But Thomas stood in the living room, looked toward the front window, and smiled. "Selena," he said, "I can see Christmas right there." I asked him what he meant. He pointed to the corner by the window. "Tree goes there. Claire's stockings on the mantel. You reading on the couch. Me pretending I know how to fix whatever breaks next." Claire was not even born yet, but he already pictured her there. That was Thomas. He had a way of loving people before life even introduced them to him. We bought the house with more hope than money. For the first few years, every repair was done by Thomas after work. He rewired the basement. He fixed the porch light. He patched the roof after a spring storm tore shingles loose. I painted the kitchen a soft yellow because I wanted morning sunlight even on cloudy days. We ate more canned soup than I care to admit, and I learned how to make one roasted chicken last 3 meals. But every sacrifice felt like a brick being added to something sacred. Then Claire was born. Thomas planted the maple tree in the front yard the week we brought her home from the hospital. It was barely taller than he was, then thin and trembling in the wind. He stood over it with a shovel in his hand, sweat on his forehead, and said, "One day, she'll take prom pictures under this tree." I laughed because she was 6 days old and mostly screamed when she was hungry. But he was right. Years later, Claire stood beneath that maple in a pale pink dress, rolling her eyes, because I kept taking too many pictures. Thomas stood behind me pretending not to cry. After she left for prom, he walked back to the tree and touched the trunk, like he was thanking it for keeping another memory. That house saw everything. It saw Claire's first steps across the living room floor. It heard her cry when she scraped her knee on the driveway. It smelled like cinnamon rolls on Christmas mornings and pot roast on Sundays. It held birthday balloons, school projects, late-night fevers, teenage arguments, and quiet apologies whispered at bedroom doors. The kitchen table had a small burn mark near one corner from the year Thomas tried to make me breakfast in bed for our anniversary and set a hot pan down without thinking. I never let him sand it out. I told him I liked it there. It reminded me that love did not have to be perfect to be real. The hallway upstairs still had pencil marks on the doorframe where we measured Claire's height every year. Thomas always wrote the date. His handwriting was square and careful. Mine looked like it was running late. Claire used to stand on her toes, and Thomas would gently press her heels down with his boot. "No cheating, little lady," he would say. She would giggle and accuse him of wanting her to stay short forever. Maybe he did. Maybe we both did. When Claire left for college, the house became too quiet. I used to stand in the doorway of her room, looking at the faded, glow-in-the-dark stars still stuck to her ceiling. Thomas would find me there and put his arm around my shoulders. "She's supposed to fly," he told me once. "I know," I said, "but that doesn't make the nest feel less empty." He kissed my temple. "No, it doesn't." Then came the diagnosis. Cancer is a word that enters a house like smoke. At first, you think you can open a window and clear it out. Then you realize it has already seeped into the curtains, the walls, the clothes in the closet, the way you sleep, the way you pray. Thomas fought for nearly 2 years. He tried to make it easier on me, which was exactly like him, and exactly what broke my heart. Even on the days he could barely climb the stairs, he would ask if the gutters needed cleaning, or if the basement light was flickering again. I would tell him to sit down, and he would smile that tired smile. "A man needs to feel useful," he said. "You are useful breathing," I told him. Near the end, he spent most afternoons in his recliner by the front window. The maple tree outside had grown tall by then, its branches wide enough to shade part of the porch. Sometimes he would stare at it for a long time, like he was watching a life he knew he would not finish. One evening, a week before he passed, he asked me to bring him the blue folder from his desk. I thought it was medical paperwork. By then, our lives had become folders, bills, appointment cards, pill bottles, and instructions written in tiny print. But when I handed it to him, he placed his palm on top of it and looked at me in a way that made me sit down. "Selena," he said, "I need you to promise me something." I tried to smile. "Depends what it is. I need you to promise you won't let anyone push you out of this house." The words startled me. "Who would push me out?" He looked away for a moment. "Life has a way of changing people. Money changes people faster." I thought he was talking about bills, about property taxes, about all the practical things that frightened widows before they even became widows. Thomas Claire would never. "I'm not saying she would," he said gently. "I'm saying grief makes people weak and guilt makes them weaker. You have a tender heart. That's one of the reasons I loved you. But tenderness needs protection." I remember feeling almost offended, not because he meant harm, but because the idea that Claire could ever become a person I needed protection from seemed impossible. She was our daughter, our only child, the girl whose lunchboxes I packed, whose hair I braided before school, whose college application essays Thomas read 3 times like they were sacred documents. He reached for my hand. "No matter what happens," he whispered, "this house will protect you." I did not understand what he meant. Not truly. I assumed he was trying to comfort me, trying to say the house was paid off, that I would have shelter, that I would not be alone. I cried and told him I did not want the house to protect me. I wanted him. He squeezed my hand with what little strength he had left. "I know," he said, "but let me do this one thing." After he died, the house became both my wound and my medicine. Every room hurt. His coffee mug still sat in the cabinet. His work boots stayed by the back door for months because I could not move them. The garage smelled like sawdust and motor oil, and sometimes I stood there just to feel close to him. People told me I should clear things out, move forward, start fresh. But they did not understand. Fresh starts are easy for people who are not standing in the ashes. That house gave me a place to grieve without explaining myself. I could cry in the laundry room with the dryer running. I could talk to Thomas while watering the maple tree. I could sit at the kitchen table, touch the burn mark, and remember that once a man loved me enough to ruin breakfast. Claire came home often at first. She would sit with me on Sundays, bring groceries, help me change light bulbs, and tell me I needed to get out more. She still called the house home. Claire came home often at first. She would sit with me on Sundays, bring groceries, help me change light bulbs, and tell me I needed to get out more. She still called the house home then. She still kicked off her shoes by the door. She still opened the refrigerator without asking. One night, not long after Thomas's funeral, she stood in the hallway staring at the height marks on the doorframe. "I can't believe Dad kept all these," she said. "He kept everything that mattered," I told her. She ran her fingers over the marks and smiled sadly. "Don't ever sell this house, Mom." I looked at her surprised by how firm her voice was. "I won't," I said. She turned and hugged me. "Promise, I promise." At the time, I believed that promise meant the same thing to both of us. For years, I kept that promise. I stayed through winter storms, through lonely birthdays, through the first Christmas without Thomas, through nights when the silence felt so heavy, I had to turn on the television just to hear another human voice. I paid the taxes. I hired help when repairs were too much. I learned which contractors were honest and which ones saw a widow as an easy target. And slowly, I built a life there without Thomas. Not the life I wanted, but a life. I joined a church book club. I planted lavender along the walkway. I started having coffee every Wednesday with a neighbor named Ruthie, who complained about squirrels like they were organized criminals. I learned to sleep on my side of the bed without reaching across the empty half. The house held me while I learned to stand again. That is why when Claire later spoke of it like an old object taking up space, something inside me could not understand her. To her, it became square footage, equity market timing, maintenance costs. To me, it was where her father's laughter still lived in the walls. And maybe that was my mistake. I thought memory protected people from greed. I thought love protected families from cruelty. I thought a daughter who once begged me never to sell her childhood home could not one day stand in a wedding gown and announce she had sold it without my permission. But long before that terrible night before the champagne glasses and the applause before the white envelope in my purse, before Claire's smile cut me open in front of 200 strangers, there were signs. Small ones, quiet ones. The kind a mother explains away because believing the truth would hurt too much. Claire did not change all at once. That is the thing people misunderstand when they ask how a daughter can go from holding her mother's hand at a funeral to humiliating her in a room full of strangers. They imagine some great dramatic moment, some single argument, some door slamming shut forever. But it was not like that. It happened quietly. It happened in small corrections. Forced smiles, delayed phone calls, and the way her eyes began to move around my house as if she were seeing flaws instead of memories. For the first year after Thomas died, Claire was still my girl. She called every other night sometimes just to ask if I had eaten dinner. She drove down from Cleveland on Sundays when she could, bringing grocery bags full of things she thought I needed: Greek yogurt, vitamins, salmon, fillets, fancy tea. I never knew how long to steep. "You have to take care of yourself, Mom," she would say, opening my refrigerator like she still lived there. "I've managed this long," I'd answer. She would give me the same look Thomas used to give me when he thought I was pretending to be stronger than I was. Back then, I believed grief had brought us closer. She was busy, of course. She had a demanding job in marketing, a small apartment in Cleveland, friends I only knew through photographs, and a life that moved faster than mine. But she still came home. She still sat at the kitchen table and drank coffee from the mug that said, "World's Okayest Daughter," the one Thomas bought her as a joke when she was in college. Then she met Brandon Whitaker. She told me about him on a Tuesday evening while I was folding towels in the laundry room. "There's someone I want you to meet," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. I sat down on the edge of the dryer. "Someone important?" "Maybe," she said. His name is Brandon. The way she said his name made me happy at first. I had waited to hear lightness in my daughter's voice again. After Thomas died, both of us had carried sorrow like a heavy coat. If Brandon helped her feel young and hopeful, I wanted to be grateful. Claire said he worked in commercial real estate development. He was ambitious, confident, well-connected. His family belonged to a country club outside Cleveland. His mother, Patricia, chaired charity committees. His father, Harold, had owned several car dealerships before investing in property. "They're very successful," Claire said. "That's nice," I replied. "No, Mom. I mean really successful." I remember pausing with a towel in my hands. There was something in her tone I had not heard before. Not admiration exactly, more like hunger. A month later, she brought him to dinner. I spent 2 days preparing, which sounds foolish now, but I wanted everything to be right. I made Thomas's favorite pot roast because Claire once said no restaurant could beat it. I polished the dining room table, bought fresh flowers, and took out the good plates with the blue edges, the ones we used only for holidays. Brandon arrived in a navy blazer, expensive shoes, and a smile that showed every tooth without warming his eyes. "Mrs. Hughes," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Claire's told me so much about you. Please call me Selena." He glanced past me into the entryway. Beautiful old place. Old. Not lovely. Not warm. Not charming. Old. Still, I smiled. "Thank you. My husband and I bought it many years ago." Claire gave me a quick look. I did not understand it then, but later I would come to know that look well. It meant don't say too much. Dinner began pleasantly enough. Brandon complimented the food, asked polite questions about my work at the library, and told a few stories about development projects his firm was pursuing. He knew how to sound interested. He knew when to lean forward, when to laugh, when to say just enough to make himself seem thoughtful. But he also knew how to measure a room. His eyes moved constantly. To the crown molding, Thomas installed himself. To the scuff near the baseboard. To the old chandelier over the dining table. To the framed family photographs on the wall. He looked at my home like a man calculating what could be torn out and replaced. After dinner, Claire helped me carry plates into the kitchen. Brandon stayed near the living room window, looking toward the street. "You didn't have to make pot roast," Claire whispered. "You love pot roast." "I know, but it's kind of heavy. Brandon usually eats lighter." I looked at the plates in my hands. He said he liked it. He was being polite. The words stung more than they should have. I told myself she was nervous. People act strangely when they want someone they love to be accepted. When we returned to the living room, Brandon was standing by the mantel, studying a photograph of Thomas in his work shirt, smiling with one arm around a teenage Claire. "Your husband was an electrician, right?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "A very good one." He nodded. "Skilled trades can be great work." "Can be." Claire changed the subject before I could answer. That night after they left, I walked through the house, slowly turning off lamps. Everything looked the same, but something felt altered, as if a stranger had come in and silently judged every corner. The next few months brought more little changes. Claire stopped calling the house home as often. She started saying your place. "How are things at your place, Mom? Do you still have all that old furniture at your place? Maybe one weekend we can go through your place and clear some clutter." At first, I laughed it off. I was in my 60s, not ancient, but I knew younger people liked clean lines and open spaces. Claire's apartment looked like a furniture catalog where no one had ever spilled coffee or cried into a pillow. My house had Afghans framed school pictures, a drawer full of takeout menus, and a ceramic rooster Thomas bought at a flea market because he thought it was so ugly it deserved a loving home. One Saturday, Claire came over with Brandon, and I noticed she had dressed differently than usual. Sleek beige coat, gold earrings, hair perfectly straightened. She looked beautiful, but also tense, like she was performing herself. I had made chicken salad sandwiches and lemonade. Claire saw the table and gave a tiny sigh. What I asked? Nothing. But Brandon smiled and said, "This is nice, very traditional." The words sounded harmless, yet somehow landed like an insult. While Claire was upstairs taking a call, Brandon walked with me into the backyard. The maple tree was full and green, its leaves flickering in the afternoon sun. "Big lot," he said. "Thomas loved having space." "I bet developers would love this street," he said casually. "Older homes, established neighborhood, good school district. You'd be surprised what properties like this are worth now." I looked at him. "I'm not planning to sell." He lifted both hands, slightly smiling. "Of course." I didn't mean anything by it, but he had meant something. I felt it even then. Later, as they were leaving, Claire lingered in the hallway and glanced at my sweater. "Mom, can I say something without you getting offended?" That sentence has never led anywhere gentle. "I suppose. When you come up for dinner with Brandon's parents next month, maybe we should go shopping first." I looked down at myself. What's wrong with my clothes? Nothing is wrong. It's just they're a little dated. Dated, old, traditional. Dated. Words began collecting around me like dust. I tried to smile. "I'm not trying to impress anyone, honey." "I know," she said quickly, "but they're different. The Whitakers are polished. I just don't want you to feel out of place." But that was not what she meant. She did not want me to make her feel out of place. At dinner with Brandon's parents, I understood more. Patricia Whitaker had silver blonde hair, a diamond tennis bracelet, and the sort of smile that made you feel inspected. Harold was quieter, but his silence had weight. Their house looked staged with tall windows, pale rugs, and art that seemed chosen by someone who used words like investment and acquisition. Patricia asked me where I lived. "Outside Columbus," I said. "In the same house where Claire grew up." "How sweet," she replied in a tone that made sweet sound small. Harold asked about the neighborhood property taxes and whether I had considered selling while the market was strong. Claire laughed lightly. "Mom is very attached." Attached, as if I were a child clinging to a blanket. I looked at my daughter across the table, waiting for her to say something kind about the house, about her father, about the life that had raised her. Instead, she reached for her wine glass and said, "It's just hard for her to let go of things." That night, driving home alone, I cried for the first time. Not because I missed Thomas, but because I missed who Claire used to be. After that, Brandon became a shadow in every conversation. Claire would call and mention mortgage rates, retirement communities, maintenance costs, home equity. She sent me links to condos with elevators and fitness rooms. She talked about simplifying my life. "You deserve freedom, Mom," she said one evening. "I have freedom," I told her. "I wake up in my own bed. I drink coffee in my own kitchen. I sit under the tree your father planted. That feels like freedom to me." She went quiet. Then she said, "Sometimes people confuse comfort with being stuck." I closed my eyes. I could almost hear Brandon in the sentence, yet I did not blame him completely. That would have been easier. It would have let me believe Claire was still innocent underneath, merely influenced by a man with polished shoes and cold ambition. But the truth was more painful. Brandon may have opened the door, but Claire walked through it. She began to see my life as something outdated. She began to see my memories as clutter. She began to see the house not as the place her father had loved us, but as money sleeping under my roof. And because I was her mother, I kept making excuses. She's stressed. She's trying to fit in. She misses her father. She doesn't mean it that way. A mother can build an entire shelter out of excuses, then sit inside it while the storm gets closer. I sat inside mine for far too long. The first true crack came on an ordinary afternoon when Claire stood in my living room beside Brandon, looking around with a strange expression on her face. Not sadness, not nostalgia, calculation. Brandon touched the mantel and said softly, almost to himself, "With the right timing, this place could change everything." Claire did not correct him. She did not look offended. She looked at him, then at me, and smiled as if I were the only thing standing between her and the life she believed she deserved. After that afternoon, the house stopped being just my home and Claire's conversations. It became a topic, a problem, a situation. At first, she wrapped every suggestion in concern, the way people hide a sharp blade inside a velvet box. "Mom, have you thought about downsizing?" she asked one night while I was rinsing a coffee cup at the sink. I almost laughed because the words sounded so neat, so harmless, like folding a sweater and putting it into a smaller drawer. "Downsizing," I repeated. "Yes," she said, "just considering it. You're in that big house alone, and I worry." I looked around my kitchen. Big house. Alone. Those words made the room feel colder. "It's not too big for me," I said. "I know every sound it makes." "That's not the point." "What is the point?" She sighed, and I could picture her in her Cleveland apartment, probably pacing by those tall windows, one hand on her hip. "The point is maintenance, safety, taxes. What if something happens? What if you fall? What if the furnace goes out in January? What if you can't keep up?" I have kept up, for now. Those two words sat between us, for now. I did not argue. I had learned, as many mothers do, that arguing with an adult child can feel like trying to hold water in your hands. The harder you squeeze, the faster something slips away. So I softened my voice. "Honey, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not ready to leave my home." There was a pause. Then Claire said, "Nobody said you had to leave tomorrow." Tomorrow. Not never. Not if. Tomorrow. I hung up that night feeling uneasy, but I still told myself she meant well. I even repeated that out loud while I wiped the counter. She means well. The house, of course, said nothing. But if walls could listen, mine had heard me lie to myself before. A week later, Claire emailed me listings for condos near downtown Columbus. The subject line was cheerful. Just ideas. The first one had white cabinets, gray floors, and a balcony overlooking a parking garage. The second one was in a senior-friendly building with an elevator and a fitness room. The third had a community lounge and underground parking. I stared at the pictures and felt no hatred toward them. They were fine places, clean places, safe places. But they had no Thomas in them. No pencil marks on the doorframe, no maple tree, no kitchen burn mark, no porch step that creaked in the exact spot where Claire used to sit with popsicles in July. Claire called the next morning before I had responded. "Did you look?" she asked. I did. "And they're nice. That's all." "What do you want me to say, Claire?" "I want you to admit they make sense." I sat at the kitchen table looking at Thomas's empty chair. "Not everything that makes sense on paper makes sense to the heart." She made a frustrated sound. "Mom, that's exactly what I mean. You make every practical conversation emotional. Because this is my life, and I'm trying to help you make smart choices with it." There it was again, that tone. Not cruel enough to confront, not kind enough to trust. Soon, Brandon began joining these conversations. Sometimes, Claire would put me on speaker without warning, and his voice would slide in smooth and confident. "Selena, we just want to make sure you're protected," he said once. Protected. That word made my stomach tighten because Thomas had used it too, but with love. Brandon used it like a salesman. "I appreciate that," I said. "The market's strong right now," Brandon continued. "Homes in established neighborhoods are moving fast. If you waited too long, you could lose a lot of value." "I'm not looking for value," I said. "I'm looking for peace." He chuckled softly, as if I had said something charming but childish. Peace is easier when your assets are working for you. My assets, not my home. I looked across the room at the mantel where Thomas's picture stood. In the photograph, he was smiling in his old work jacket, the one with a tear near the cuff. I wondered what he would have said if he had heard Brandon reduce our life to an asset. Probably nothing at first. Thomas had been quiet when angry. That was how I always knew. Claire began visiting more often, but the visits had changed. She no longer came just to sit with me or bring groceries. She came with folders, printouts, suggestions. She walked through rooms and pointed things out. The wallpaper in the downstairs bathroom is really dated. Mom, these windows are probably costing you a fortune in heating. You don't use half these rooms. This neighborhood has changed a lot. Each sentence was small enough to survive alone. Together, they became a campaign. One Saturday morning, she arrived with Brandon and 2 coffees from a place I had never heard of. Mine tasted bitter and expensive. We thought we could help you organize the office, Claire said brightly. I glanced toward the closed door of Thomas's old study. My office is organized. Mom, she smiled as if correcting a child. There are boxes in there from when Dad was alive. I know what's in those boxes. Do you? That hurt? Not because she was wrong. There were probably things in that room I had not touched in years. But grief has its own filing system. Some boxes remain closed not because you forget them, but because opening them costs too much. Brandon stepped in gently. It might be useful to get the important documents sorted. Deeds, insurance, tax records. That way, if anything ever happened, Claire wouldn't be scrambling. I looked from him to my daughter. If anything ever happened, I repeated. Claire's face tightened. That's not what he meant. It is what he said. We're trying to be responsible. No, I said quietly. You're trying to make me feel irresponsible for staying where I belong. The room went still. For a moment, I saw something flicker in Claire's eyes. Guilt, maybe, or annoyance. It passed quickly. Fine, she said. Forget I offered. She grabbed her coat and left soon after, Brandon following with that measured politeness of his. At the door, he turned back. No pressure, Selena, he said, but pressure was exactly what he left behind. The strange thing was, I started questioning myself. That is what constant pushing does. It turns your own mind into an unfriendly room. I would wake at night and wonder if the house really was too much. I would look at the stairs and imagine falling. I would open a property tax bill and hear Claire's voice. I would see a loose gutter and hear Brandon talking about assets. Then I would remember Thomas in the living room pointing to the corner where our Christmas tree would go. No, I was not ready. And readiness mattered. The day I found Claire in Thomas's study, rain was tapping against the windows. She had come by unexpectedly, saying she was in the area. Brandon was waiting in the car because he had a call, she said. I made tea, but while I was in the kitchen, I noticed the house had gone too quiet. Claire. No answer. I walked down the hallway and saw the study door half open. Thomas's study still smelled faintly of paperwood polish and the cedar blocks he kept in the closet. I found Claire standing by the desk with her phone in her hand. The bottom drawer was open. She startled when she saw me. Mom! What are you doing? Her face changed quickly, smoothing itself into innocence. I was just looking for Dad's old warranty folder. You mentioned the furnace, remember? I did not ask you to look through this room. I was trying to help. I stepped closer. On the desk lay several papers that had not been there before, an old property tax statement, a homeowner's insurance policy, and a copy of the deed from years ago. My breath caught. Why are these out? Claire glanced down. I don't know. They were probably already there. They were not. She slipped her phone into her coat pocket. It was such a small movement, but I saw it. A mother sees things other people miss. The hidden candy wrapper, the fake smile, the hand moving too quickly. "Did you take pictures of my documents?" I asked. Her eyes widened, not with innocence, but with offense. "Are you serious? Answer me. I cannot believe you think I would do something shady. I didn't use that word, but you meant it." Her voice sharpened. "After everything I've been trying to do for you, this is what I get." I felt my hands begin to tremble, so I folded them in front of me. "Claire, those are private papers. I'm your daughter. That does not make them yours." The moment I said it, something hardened in her face. Not fully, not openly, but enough. She looked at me as if I had denied her something she had already claimed in her mind. Then she laughed once coldly. "You know, one day I'm going to be the one dealing with all of this anyway." "All of what?" "This house. These papers. Everything you refuse to talk about like an adult." I stared at her. For the first time, I felt something stronger than hurt. Fear. Because Claire had not spoken like a concerned daughter. She had spoken like an heir waiting impatiently outside a locked door. I told her it was time to leave. She stormed out, and a minute later, I saw Brandon's car pull away from the curb. I stood at the window, watching the taillights disappear through the rain. Then I went back into Thomas's study. I checked the drawer. The deed copy was there, but not quite where I kept it. The tax statement had a crease down the middle. The insurance page had been turned over. Nothing was missing, at least nothing I could see. But something had been taken anyway. My trust. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with every light off except the small lamp by the window. Rain slid down the glass. The maple tree bent in the wind, its branches scratching softly against the porch roof. I thought of calling Claire and demanding the truth. Instead, I called no one, because deep down I was afraid of hearing what I already knew. My daughter had not simply become embarrassed by my house. She had begun preparing for a future in which it no longer belonged to me. The wedding invitation arrived on a Thursday morning, tucked between a grocery store flyer and an envelope from the electric company. Cream-colored paper. Gold lettering. Heavy enough that I knew it had cost more than it needed to. I stood at the mailbox for a moment with the June sun on my shoulders, staring at Claire's name beside Brandon's. "Claire Hughes and Brandon Whitaker request the honor of your presence." Honor. That word made my eyes burn before I even opened the envelope fully. For one soft, foolish second, I forgot all the tension. I forgot the condo listings, the little insults the way she had stood in Thomas's study with her phone tucked too quickly into her pocket. I forgot Brandon's smooth voice talking about assets and timing. I was only a mother holding her daughter's wedding invitation. My Claire was getting married. The baby Thomas had carried through this very front door was going to walk down an aisle. The girl who used to wear plastic princess shoes around the kitchen would wear a real wedding dress, and her father would not be there to see it. I carried the invitation inside and placed it on the kitchen table right over the small burn mark Thomas left years ago. Then I sat down and cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the quiet kind of crying that comes when joy and grief sit down beside each other and refuse to leave. I wished Thomas could have opened that envelope with me. He would have pretended to be calm, then gone out to the garage to hide his tears. He would have complained about the cost of weddings, then spent whatever he could to make Claire happy. He would have asked if Brandon was good enough, and I would have told him no one ever would be. That evening, Claire called. "Did you get it?" she asked. "I did," I said. "It's beautiful." "Good." Her voice was bright, but there was a tightness underneath. "We worked with a stationer Patricia recommended. Patricia has elegant taste. She really does." I waited for Claire to ask if I was excited. I waited for the tender moment I had imagined all afternoon, the one where she would say, "Mom, I wish Dad were here." And I would say, "Me too, baby." I waited for her to sound like my daughter again. Instead, she cleared her throat. "So, I wanted to talk to you about a few things before the wedding." I straightened in my chair. "Of course. It's nothing bad," she said quickly. "I just want the day to go smoothly." That sentence made my stomach tighten. She began with my dress. "Mom, please don't wear that navy dress you wore to Aunt Linda's anniversary party." I looked down at my lap, though of course I was not wearing it. "What's wrong with that dress?" "Nothing exactly. It's just old." I breathed in slowly. "It's classic." "It photographs dark," she said, "and the wedding colors are champagne ivory and sage. Navy will look too heavy." "I see. I was thinking we could go shopping. Something softer, more modern. Maybe not too matronly." I was 64 years old, a widow, a mother of the bride. Matronly was not a crime, but I only said, "I'll find something appropriate." She sounded relieved, which hurt more than if she had argued. "Thank you. Also, I need to ask you not to bring up certain things with Brandon's family." "What things?" There was a pause. "Just old stories." I looked at Thomas's photograph on the mantel across the room. "Old stories. Mom, you know what I mean?" "No, Claire, I don't." She sighed, and suddenly I could hear the irritation she was trying to hide. Stories about Dad working as an electrician, or how you two struggled when you first bought the house, or how we didn't have much when I was little. It's not that I'm ashamed. It's just not the vibe of the weekend. The vibe. My husband's honest work. Our sacrifices, the years we spent building the life she now stood on, that was not the vibe. I pressed my fingers against the edge of the table. "Your father's work paid for that childhood you don't want mentioned." "I know that," she said. "Please don't twist my words." "I'm not twisting them." "Yes, you are." "I'm just saying Brandon's family doesn't need the whole hardship tour." "Hardship tour?" The words landed so hard I nearly lost my breath. Claire rushed on. "And please don't get emotional during the speeches. I know Dad not being there is hard, but if you cry too much, people will feel awkward." For a moment, I could not speak. When Claire was 6 years old, she had cried so hard on her first day of school that Thomas had to sit with her on the curb until the bell rang. When she was 13 and her first little crush did not ask her to the dance, she sobbed into my shoulder until my blouse was damp. When she left for college, she cried in the driveway and told me she was scared she would not know how to be a grown-up. Never once had I told her that her tears were awkward. "I'll do my best," I said quietly. "Mom, don't say it like that." "Like what?" "Like I'm hurting you on purpose." I closed my eyes. That was the cruelest part. I did not know if she was hurting me on purpose. I only knew she no longer seemed bothered by the fact that she was hurting me at all. She softened her voice. "I just want everything to be beautiful. So do I." "No, I mean—" She stopped herself. "This wedding matters, Mom. Brandon's family has invited important people. His father's business partners, Patricia's charity circle, some people from his firm. I need them to see that I belong." There it was, small, naked, almost childlike. I need them to see that I belong. For a second, my anger slipped, and I heard the frightened girl underneath the polished woman. Claire had always wanted approval. Gold stars, good grades, perfect hair, the right college, the right job. Maybe Brandon and the Whitakers had not created that hunger. Maybe they had simply fed it until it became something ugly. "You do belong," I said. "You don't have to erase where you came from to prove that." She was silent. Then she said, "That sounds nice, Mom, but that's not how the world works." I looked around my kitchen at the cabinets. Thomas repaired the curtains I had sewn myself, the old clock above the stove. It depends which world you choose to live in. Claire exhaled sharply. I can't do this tonight. I thought the conversation was ending, but then her tone changed again, brighter, almost rehearsed. There's one more thing. My hand tightened around the phone. After the wedding, she said, everything will finally be settled. I sat very still. Settled? I asked. What does that mean? Oh, just life. Plans. The future. What plans, Mom? Don't start. I'm asking a simple question. And I'm telling you, not everything has to be a fight. I stood from the table and walked to the window. Outside, the maple tree moved gently in the evening breeze, its leaves dark against the fading sky. Does this have something to do with my house? I asked. Claire did not answer right away. That silence told me more than her words would have. Finally, she said, We'll talk about it later. No, we can talk about it now. I have to go. Brandon's waiting. Claire. What I heard, the edge in her voice, then sharp and impatient, and for one strange moment, I felt like the child while she sounded like the one in charge. I have not agreed to sell this house, I said. She gave a small laugh, but there was no humor in it. Nobody said you did. Then why do I feel like everyone is planning around it because you're being paranoid? That word struck me cold. Paranoid, not cautious, not concerned, not a mother asking why her daughter had gone through private papers. Paranoid. I wanted to remind her of Thomas's study of the documents, of Brandon's comments, of the condo listings, of the way every conversation somehow circled back to the same thing. But I knew she would deny it, and I was too tired to argue with someone who had already chosen her version of the truth. So I said, I'll see you at the wedding. Her voice softened just enough to confuse my heart. I do want you there, Mom. Do you? Of course I do. You're my mother. I wished that still felt like an answer. After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. The invitation lay open on the table, beautiful and expensive, promising love family celebration. But all I could feel was a quiet warning moving through the house. Everything will finally be settled. I repeated the words under my breath. There was a time when Claire's wedding would have meant flowers, music, happy tears, and Thomas's empty chair wrapped in memory. Now it felt like an approaching storm dressed in ivory silk. Over the next few days, I tried to behave like a normal mother of the bride. I bought a champagne-colored dress with lace sleeves because the saleswoman said it made my eyes look warm. I found low heels that would not hurt my knees. I chose a simple pearl necklace Thomas had given me on our 25th anniversary. I even bought a card for Claire and Brandon, though I stood in the aisle for nearly 20 minutes because every message felt too sweet for what was happening between us. In the end, I chose a blank card with a watercolor tree on the front. At home, I wrote only one sentence inside. May the life you build be honest enough to stand on. Then I closed the card and pressed my hand over it. I still loved my daughter. That was the terrible truth. Love does not disappear just because someone wounds you. Sometimes it stays bleeding quietly, making every decision harder than it should be. Part of me still hoped I was wrong. Part of me hoped she would call and apologize, that she would say Brandon had pushed too hard, that she had been scared and foolish, that she did not mean to make me feel small, that the house was mine, and she knew it, and she would never cross that line again. But another part of me, the part Thomas had tried to protect, had finally begun to wake up. I took the wedding invitation and placed it in the drawer beside my checkbook. Then I walked down the hallway to Thomas's study and stood in the doorway. The room was quiet. Too quiet. I looked at the desk. The drawer Claire had opened. The place where my private papers had been moved. For the first time, I wondered whether my daughter had already done something she could not undo. And for the first time, I understood that going to her wedding might not simply mean watching her begin a new life. It might mean watching her try to take mine. The call came 6 days before the wedding. I remember because I had just returned from the tailor where a young woman with kind eyes had pinned the sleeves of my champagne dress and told me I would look beautiful. I thanked her, but on the drive home, all I could think was that beauty felt like a strange thing to worry about when my heart felt so bruised. The house was quiet when I came in. Afternoon light stretched across the living room floor. Dust floated in the air like tiny secrets. I hung the dress carefully on the back of my bedroom door and made myself a cup of tea I did not really want. Then the phone rang. The caller ID showed a name I had not seen in years. Eleanor Brooks. For a moment, I only stared at it. Eleanor had been Thomas's attorney, though calling her only an attorney made her sound colder than she was. She had known Thomas since before Claire was born. Years ago, when Thomas had done electrical work in her first small office, she had been a young lawyer trying to build her practice, and he had been the kind of man who fixed a faulty breaker and refused to overcharge a widow who came in after him. Over time, she became our lawyer, then our friend. She helped us prepare our wills. She explained paperwork I never had patience for. She came to Thomas's funeral wearing a black suit and a silver cross, and when she hugged me, she whispered, "He loved you carefully, Selena. Remember that." But after the estate matters were settled, we spoke only once or twice. Life moved on in that strange way life does not, because wounds disappear. But because Bill's wounds disappear. But because bills arrive, grass grows, and the body keeps asking for breakfast. I answered on the fourth ring. "Eleanor Selena," she said, and her voice was calm, but not casual. "I'm sorry to call you unexpectedly. Do you have a few minutes arrive grass grows and the body keeps asking for breakfast?" I answered on the fourth ring. "Eleanor Selena," she said, and her voice was calm, but not casual. "I'm sorry to call you unexpectedly. Do you have a few minutes?" Something in my chest tightened. "Yes. Is everything all right?" There was a pause. "That depends on what you know." I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. The phrase sounded too much like a door opening into a room I did not want to enter. "What do you mean I received an inquiry this morning from a title office in Cleveland?" she said. They were attempting to verify certain documents connected to the Hughes property. I looked toward the hallway, toward Thomas' study. "My house." "Yes." My hand tightened around the phone. Why would a title office be asking about my house? That is what concerned me. The kitchen suddenly felt too bright, too still. Eleanor continued choosing her words carefully. The title officer said they were reviewing documents for a pending transaction. A sale, or at least a proposed sale. Your daughter's name was mentioned. For several seconds, I did not understand her. Not because the words were unclear, but because my mind refused to place them together. "A sale," I whispered. "Yes. There must be a mistake." "That may be," Eleanor said. "But I need to ask you directly. Have you authorized Claire Hughes to act on your behalf regarding the property? No. Have you signed any documents listing the property for sale? No. Have you given Brandon Whitaker or any representative of his access to your property records, financial records, or power of attorney?" My mouth went dry. "No." Eleanor was silent for one breath too long. "Selena, are you sure?" The question hurt, but I knew why she asked. Legal trouble often begins in small permissions people forget they gave. A signature here, a form there, a conversation misunderstood. But I knew what I had not done. "I have not signed anything," I said. I have not agreed to sell my home. I have not given anyone permission. Then we may have a problem. The tea on the table had gone untouched. A pale ring of steam faded above the cup. What kind of problem? I don't want to alarm you without confirming more, but the title office had copies of old property records and what appears to be a statement representing that Claire has authority connected to the future transfer of the home. She doesn't. No, Eleanor said. She does not. The firmness in her voice steadied me for half a second. Then my thoughts began racing. Claire and Thomas's study, the open drawer, the papers spread across the desk, her phone slipping into her coat pocket. Brandon's voice saying, with the right timing, this place could change everything. I pressed my hand to my stomach. Oh my God, I whispered. Selena, listen to me, Eleanor said. Has Claire been asking you about selling? I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because the question was so small compared to the storm behind it. Yes, I said, for months. Has Brandon been involved? Yes. Have either of them had access to your documents? I closed my eyes. Claire was in Thomas' study. I found her with property papers out. She said she was organizing things. When was this? A few weeks ago. Did she photograph anything I asked her that? She denied it. Did you believe her? The silence that followed was my answer. Eleanor sighed softly, not with impatience, but with the heavy sadness of someone watching a family tragedy turn legal. I'm going to be very direct with you, she said. Do not confront Claire yet. My eyes opened. What? Do not call her. Do not text her. Do not accuse her. Not yet. She may be trying to sell my house. I understand. No, I said, my voice shaking now. I don't think you do. This is my daughter, my only child. Her wedding is in 6 days. She told me everything would be settled after the wedding. She asked me not to talk about her father. She asked me not to embarrass her. And now you're telling me there may be papers somewhere saying she can sell my home. I am telling you, Eleanor said gently, that someone appears to be creating the impression that she can. That distinction did not comfort me. I stood from the table and walked to the sink, then turned back because I had nowhere to go. The whole house seemed to lean toward me, listening. The yellow kitchen, the mantel, the hallway, Thomas's picture. All at once, I felt foolish. Foolish for ignoring the signs. Foolish for wanting the wedding to heal things. Foolish for still hoping Claire would choose love before ambition. What do? I asked. You bring me every document you have related to the house, the trust, Thomas's estate, your tax records, and any communication Claire or Brandon sent about selling or downsizing. The trust, I repeated. Yes. The word stirred something in my memory. Thomas, in his recliner. The blue folder, his thin hand resting on top of it. No matter what happens, this house will protect you. I gripped the edge of the counter. Eleanor, I said slowly, what exactly did Thomas do? Another pause. Come to my office tomorrow morning. I'll explain everything in person. Can't you explain it now? I could. But I want you sitting across from me when I do. And I want the documents in front of us. A chill moved through me. Is it bad? It may be the reason your house is still safe. I sank back into the chair. Still safe. Those words should have comforted me, but they only made me realize how close I might have come to losing everything without even knowing. Selena, Eleanor said, softer. Now I know this is painful. But pain can make people react too quickly. Right now, we need clarity. We need evidence. If Claire and Brandon have done nothing more than misunderstand legal rights, we address that. If they have gone further, we stop it properly. Properly, I repeated. Yes. Not emotionally, not over the phone, not in a way that gives anyone a chance to hide what they've done. I thought of Claire walking down the aisle in white, guests smiling, Brandon standing beside her, Patricia Whitaker watching everything with polished approval. All that beauty built over a crack in the foundation. What if she announces something at the wedding, I asked. The question came out before I could stop it. Eleanor did not answer immediately. Why would you ask that? I told her about Claire's strange sentence, about everything being settled, about the way the Whitakers had spoken around the house, as if it were already a resource being moved. Eleanor's voice changed then. Not louder, but sharper. Then you come prepared. My heart began pounding. Prepared how? Bring the documents. Bring the truth. And Selena. Yes, if your daughter is planning to use a public moment to pressure you, shame you, or present a false story as fact, you have every right to correct the record publicly. I covered my mouth with my hand. The thought of standing against Claire in front of people made me feel sick. A mother does not spend her life teaching a child to walk, only to imagine one day standing in her path. Every instinct in me wanted to protect her even from consequences she might have earned. I don't want to ruin her wedding, I whispered. Eleanor's reply was quiet but firm. Then pray she does not try to ruin your life during it. I closed my eyes. For the first time since the invitation arrived, I allowed myself to face the truth plainly. Something was wrong. Not a misunderstanding, not stress, not wedding nerves. Something calculated was moving beneath the surface, and my daughter's name was attached to it. After we hung up, I went to Thomas's study. I opened the drawer Claire had searched and began taking out folders with trembling hands. Tax records, insurance papers, old mortgage satisfaction documents. The blue folder Thomas had once asked me to bring him near the end. I placed it on the desk and rested my palm on top of it, just as he had. For years, I had avoided looking too closely inside because it hurt to touch the last things he had prepared. But now, standing in that quiet room, I felt something shift. Grief had made me gentle. Love had made me patient. But betrayal was beginning to make me awake. I looked at Thomas's photograph on the shelf and whispered, "What did you know that I didn't?" The house gave no answer. But somewhere inside that blue folder, I began to suspect my husband already had. The next morning, I drove to Eleanor Brooks's office with the blue folder on the passenger seat. I remember keeping one hand on the steering wheel and the other resting on that folder every time I stopped at a red light, as if someone might reach through the window and take it from me. That was how frightened I had become. Not frightened of a stranger. Not frightened of a criminal in the dark. Frightened of my own daughter's choices. Eleanor's office was in a brick building near downtown Columbus, the kind with polished brass numbers beside the door and old oak floors that creaked softly beneath your shoes. I had been there years ago with Thomas, back when we signed papers I barely understood, because I trusted the man sitting beside me. Back then, legal documents felt like a language for other people, people with disputes, money, complicated lives. I never imagined they would become the shield between me and my child. Eleanor greeted me herself. She was in her early 70s by then, with silver hair pulled neatly back and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. Her face softened when she saw me clutching the folder against my chest. "Oh, Selena," she said quietly. That was all it took. I had promised myself I would stay composed. I had put on lipstick. I had worn my good beige cardigan. I had driven there repeating, "Be calm, be clear, be strong." But kindness cracked me open. Eleanor closed the office door and let me cry in the chair across from her desk without rushing me. She did not hand me tissues with pity. She simply placed the box near my hand, then waited until I could breathe again. "I feel stupid," I whispered. "You are not stupid. I saw things. I knew something was wrong. I just kept telling myself Claire wouldn't do that." Eleanor leaned back slightly. "That is not stupidity. That is motherhood." I wiped my face. "Sometimes I'm not sure there's a difference." Her eyes grew sad. "There is. Motherhood hopes. Stupidity ignores. You came here. That means you stopped ignoring." I placed the blue folder on her desk. "This is what Thomas gave me near the end." She rested her hand on it for a moment before opening it, almost like she was honoring him. Inside were copies of our wills, the deed history, insurance information, and documents marked with words I remembered seeing but never fully absorbing. Hughes Family Trust. Eleanor took out several pages and arranged them carefully. "Selena," she said, "I'm going to explain this plainly. Please." Years before Thomas passed, he came to see me alone. I looked up. Alone, yes. He had already been thinking about protecting the house. Not because he distrusted Claire as a daughter then, but because he understood something many people refuse to face. Inheritance can become dangerous when expectations grow faster than gratitude. The words settled heavily in the room. "He never told me that," I said. "He did not want to hurt you. He knew you believed Claire would always protect you." "I did believe that. I know." Eleanor slid one document toward me. Thomas placed the house into the Hughes Family Trust. That means the property was no longer held in the simple way most people think of ownership. It had rules attached to it, protective rules. I stared at the paper. The words blurred slightly. "Do I own my house?" "Yes," she said firmly. "In the way that matters most for your life, yes. You have the right to live there for the rest of your life. No one can remove you. No one can sell it out from under you. No one can force you to leave because they want money sooner." A sound came out of me that was half breath, half sob. Eleanor continued gently. "Claire is named as a remainder beneficiary." "What does that mean?" "It means she may inherit an interest after your death, depending on the terms that remain in place. But she has no present right to sell, mortgage, transfer, or control the property while you are alive." I put my fingers to my lips. "While you are alive." There was something brutal and beautiful about that phrase. Brutal because it showed me exactly what Claire had been trying to step around. Beautiful because Thomas had seen the line and built a wall on it. Eleanor pointed to another section. "This clause gives you what people often call a life estate interest. In simple terms, the house is your home for your lifetime. You cannot be displaced by a future beneficiary. Claire's future expectation does not outrank your present rights." "My present rights," I repeated. It had been so long since I thought of myself in those terms. Rights, not favors, not emotional negotiations, not something my daughter could approve or resent. Rights. "The trust also requires trustee confirmation for any major transaction involving the property," Eleanor said. "And your valid signature would be necessary. Not a copy, not an assumption, not family pressure. A lawful signature given knowingly." "I never signed anything. I believe you." "What did the title office have?" Eleanor's expression changed. "That is what we are still determining. From what they described, someone may have submitted old deed records, tax documents, and a statement suggesting Claire had authority as Thomas's heir. But Thomas has been gone for years. Yes, and heirship alone would not give her current authority over trust property." That is why the title officer contacted my office. The trust was flagged in prior records. I closed my eyes. Thank God for that title officer, I thought. Thank God for a stranger doing their job. Could Claire have misunderstood, I asked, though even as I said it, my voice sounded weak. Eleanor looked at me for a long moment. She could have misunderstood some of it at first. Many people misunderstand future inheritance, but misunderstanding does not explain why you were not told. It does not explain documents being gathered without your consent. It does not explain a pending transaction you knew nothing about. Each sentence removed another excuse from my hands. I looked toward the window behind Eleanor's desk. Outside, people moved along the sidewalk carrying coffee briefcases, ordinary lives. The world had the nerve to keep going while mine rearranged itself. Brandon knows real estate, I said. Yes, so he would understand these things. He should, and Claire works in marketing. She knows how to make something sound better than it is. Eleanor did not respond, but her silence agreed. A cold thought passed through me. What if they planned to tell people I agreed? Eleanor folded her hands on the desk. That is possible. At the wedding, it is possible. I pressed my palms flat against my skirt. Why would she do that there? Public pressure can be powerful, Eleanor said. If a story is announced in front of family, friends, and future in-laws, the person being used in the story may feel too embarrassed to object, especially a mother. Especially a mother who does not want to ruin her daughter's wedding. I felt my stomach turn. She knows me, I whispered. Yes, Eleanor said. That may be why she believed it would work. Those words hurt more than any accusation. Because they suggested Claire had not forgotten my love. She had counted on it. Eleanor opened another folder and took out a clean copy of the trust certificate. She placed it in front of me. This is the paper you need. I stared at it. It looked ordinary. White paper, black print, a notary stamp, legal language arranged in neat paragraphs. Nothing about it looked powerful enough to stop betrayal. Yet Eleanor's hand rested on it with complete confidence. This confirms the existence of the Hughes family trust, she said. It identifies the property. It confirms your rights and the limitations on any transfer. I touched the edge of the page. This can stop the sale. It already gives us the basis to stop it. I'm contacting the title office formally today. I will provide notice that any proposed transaction is unauthorized and legally defective. If necessary, we will record additional notice. But Selena, you should keep a copy with YU until this is resolved. With me is unauthorized and legally defective. If necessary, we will record additional notice. But Selena, you should keep a copy with you until this is resolved. With me. Yes. I thought of the wedding invitation in my drawer, the dress hanging on my bedroom door, Claire's voice saying, "Everything will finally be settled." Do you think I should still go? I asked. Eleanor's face softened again. That is not a legal question. I know. As your lawyer, I would say you should not walk into that room unprepared. As someone who knew Thomas, I think he would want you to stand where you choose, not where fear places you. My throat tightened. Thomas always thought ahead, I said. He did. I used to tease him for keeping warranties for appliances we didn't own anymore. Eleanor smiled faintly. And yet here we are. A sad laugh escaped me. Then tears came again, but different ones this time. Not helpless tears, grateful ones. I cried because Thomas had loved me carefully, just as Eleanor said. He had seen beyond the soft days, beyond Claire's childhood promises, beyond my belief that family could never become a threat. He had built protection into paper because he knew one day my heart might not be strong enough to protect itself. Eleanor made several copies. She highlighted the key clauses. She placed them in a white envelope and wrote my name across the front in blue ink. "Keep this in your purse," she said. I nodded. "And Selena, yes. If Claire says nothing at the wedding, you say nothing. Let the legal process handle the rest quietly." "And if she does?" Eleanor looked directly at me. "Then you tell the truth." I left her office just after noon, carrying the envelope like it weighed 10 pounds. On the drive home, I passed neighborhoods full of houses, brick ranches, white colonials, little bungalows with flower pots on the steps. I wondered how many of them held stories no one outside could see. How many mothers sat at kitchen tables trying to understand when love had turned into entitlement. How many widows had been told to let go before they were ready. When I pulled into my driveway, the maple tree was moving gently in the wind. I sat in the car for a long time, looking at the house Thomas and I had built our life inside. For the first time in weeks, I did not feel only afraid. I felt protected. But protection did not erase pain. Because now I knew the truth. Claire could not legally sell my house. But she had been willing to try. And that knowledge changed the way the whole world looked. For the next 2 days, I lived like two women inside one body. One woman was still a mother. She looked at Claire's wedding invitation and remembered a little girl with missing front teeth running through the sprinkler in the backyard. She remembered Claire sitting on Thomas's shoulders at the county fair, sticky with cotton candy and laughter. She remembered the night Claire got her first heartbreak and crawled into my bed like she was 5 years old again. That woman wanted to call her daughter. She wanted to say, "Baby, please tell me this isn't true. Please tell me you haven't let greed or fear or that man turn you into someone I don't recognize." But the other woman, the one who had sat across from Eleanor Brooks and read the trust documents, knew better. That woman understood that love without caution can become a trap. She understood that people who plan in secret rarely confess because you ask nicely. She understood that if Claire and Brandon had already gone as far as involving a title office, then a tearful phone call from me would not bring honesty. It would only warn them. So I stayed quiet. Staying quiet was harder than I expected. Every time the phone rang, my heart jumped. Every time Claire's name appeared on my screen, I stared at it until it stopped. She left one voicemail about the rehearsal dinner schedule, another about transportation from the hotel to the country club, and a third reminding me not to arrive too early because the photographer would be doing first look pictures. Her voice sounded normal. That was what frightened me most. How could she sound normal when something so ugly was happening beneath us? How could she remind me about parking and lipstick while knowing she might have tried to take the roof over my head? On the third morning, Eleanor called with an update. "I've contacted the title office formally," she said. "They have paused everything." I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. So the house is safe. For now, yes. Nothing can proceed without proper authority, and they know we are watching. For now. I was beginning to hate those two words. Did they say who submitted the paperwork? "They were careful," Eleanor replied. "They have to be, but Brandon's name appears in communications, and Claire's name appears in connection with claimed family authority. I have requested copies through the appropriate channels." I stood beside the kitchen sink, looking out at the maple tree. "Claimed family authority," I repeated. "Yes, she is my daughter," I said quietly. "Not my owner." Eleanor was silent for a moment. "Remember that sentence?" I frowned. "Why?" "Because you may need it." That afternoon, I placed the white envelope on my bed and stared at it for nearly 10 minutes. It looked so plain. No ribbon, no seal, no dramatic warning on the front. Just my name, written in Eleanor's handwriting, Selena Hughes. Inside were copies of the trust certificate, the highlighted life estate clause, and Eleanor's written notice stating that no sale, transfer, or transaction involving the property was authorized by me. It was not a weapon, not exactly. It was more like a key back to my own voice. I slipped it into my purse. Then I took it out again. Then I put it back. I did that 3 times, as if my hands were trying to decide whether I was truly the kind of woman who could carry legal documents to her daughter's wedding. I had never imagined myself that way. I had imagined myself carrying tissues, a small lipstick, maybe a picture of Thomas tucked discreetly into my purse so I could feel he was with me. I imagined squeezing Claire's hand before the ceremony, telling her she looked beautiful, whispering that her father would have been proud. Instead, I was preparing for the possibility that my daughter might lie about me in front of 200 people. The night before the wedding, I barely slept. I laid my dress across the chair in my bedroom. Champagne-colored soft lace sleeves, modest neckline. Claire would approve of it, I thought bitterly, then hated myself for still caring. My pearl necklace sat on the dresser beside Thomas's photograph. In the picture, he was standing in our backyard, with one hand on the maple tree squinting into the sunlight. "You knew," I whispered. Yes. Of course he had not known exactly. Thomas had not predicted a country club wedding, a groom named Brandon Whitaker, or our daughter turning our home into a financial stepping stone. But he had known human weakness. He had known that grief could make me too forgiving. He had known that one day someone might confuse my kindness with permission. I sat on the edge of the bed and held the photograph. "I don't want to fight her," I said. The room gave me no answer. "I don't want to embarrass her. Still nothing. I don't want to lose my daughter." That was the truth underneath every other truth. I could protect my house. Eleanor had shown me that. I could stop a fraudulent transaction. I could correct a public lie, but no legal document could protect me from the grief of seeing my child become someone I had to defend myself against. I cried, then not the helpless crying from Eleanor's office, but the quiet, aching cry of a mother who has run out of excuses. After a while, I got up and walked down the hallway to Thomas's study. The house was dark, except for the lamp on his old desk. I had left it on without realizing. The blue folder was still there, now thinner, because Eleanor had taken some copies. I ran my fingers over the edge of the desk. Thomas had built it from oak boards he bought from a lumber yard going out of business. He used to say good wood deserved a second chance. Maybe people did too. But second chances were not the same as blind trust. That was what I was beginning to learn. I opened my phone and listened to Claire's last voicemail again. "Hi, Mom. Just reminding you that the ceremony starts at 4, but guests should be seated by 3:30. Please don't come into the bridal suite unless I text you. It's going to be chaotic, and I really need the morning to stay calm. Okay, love you." Love you. She said it quickly, like punctuation. I wondered if she meant it. I wondered if people could love you and still betray you if the thing they wanted was big enough. I wondered if love, when mixed with entitlement, became something dangerous. The next morning dawned clear and bright, which felt almost insulting. A storm would have made more sense. Rain against the windows, thunder over the roof. Some sign from heaven that the day was not as beautiful as everyone pretended it was. But the sky was blue. The sunlight touched the maple leaves in soft gold. Birds hopped along the porch railing as if nothing in the world had broken. I made coffee and could barely drink it. My hands shook as I dressed. I fastened the pearl necklace twice because the clasp slipped the first time. I pinned my hair back, then unpinned it, then pinned it again. I applied lipstick carefully, hearing Claire's voice in my head telling me not to look dated. Then I stopped. I looked at myself in the mirror. A 64-year-old widow stared back at me. Fine lines around the eyes, softness in the jaw, silver at the roots no salon could fully hide anymore. But there was something else in my face that morning. Resolve. Not anger. Not yet. Resolve. I opened my purse and checked the envelope. Still there. Beside it, I placed Claire's wedding card, the one with the watercolor tree and the sentence I had written inside, "May the life you build be honest enough to stand on." For a moment, I considered taking it out. It felt too painful now, too pointed, too close to the truth. But I left it in. Because I still wanted that for her. Even after everything, I still wanted my daughter to build an honest life. Before leaving, I walked through the house slowly. I touched the kitchen table, the hallway doorframe with Claire's height marks, the banister Thomas had sanded by hand, the mantel where his photograph stood. I wanted to remind myself what I was protecting. Not wood, not walls, not resale value. A life. My life. At the front door, I paused and looked back. "I'll come home," I said aloud. It sounded strange, but I needed to hear it. Then I stepped onto the porch, locked the door behind me, and walked to the car. As I backed out of the driveway, the maple tree filled my rearview mirror. For a second, I saw not a tree, but all the years beneath it. Claire's prom pictures, Thomas's hands in the soil, autumn leaves, piled high for a little girl to jump into. I gripped the steering wheel and kept driving. I did not know then whether Claire would stay silent or expose herself. I did not know whether Brandon had convinced her that a public lie could become truth if enough people applauded. I only knew one thing. I was not going to that wedding empty-handed. And I was not going as the weak, sentimental mother they expected. The country club sat on a hill outside Cleveland, wrapped in green lawns so perfect they looked almost artificial. As I drove through the iron gates, I saw white tents rising beyond the main building, rows of valet attendants in black vests and flower arrangements tall enough to hide a person behind them. Everything gleamed. The windows, the cars, the silver trays being carried across the patio. Even the guests seemed polished, stepping out of SUVs and sedans in pastel dresses, tailored suits, and shoes that had never touched a muddy backyard. I parked near the far end of the lot because I did not want valet service. Maybe that sounds small, but I needed to keep control of something, even if it was only my own car keys. Before stepping out, I opened my purse and touched the white envelope. Still there. The paper inside felt stiff beneath my fingers, a quiet reminder that I was not walking into that place as helplessly as Claire imagined. The lobby smelled of Lily's perfume and expensive candles. A young woman at the welcome table checked my name on a printed list. Her smile faltered for half a second when she found it. "Selena Hughes," I said, helping her. "Yes, Mrs. Hughes?" She glanced at the seating chart, then picked up a small card. "You'll be at table 23. "Thank you." I did not know yet where table 23 was, but something about the way she avoided my eyes told me enough. Inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers hung over round tables covered in ivory linen. Sage green napkins sat folded like fans beside gold chargers. The centerpieces were white roses, hydrangeas, and long candles floating in glass cylinders. A string quartet played near the entrance, soft and sweet, like the soundtrack to a life where nobody lied. For a moment, despite everything, my breath caught. It was beautiful. Claire had always loved beautiful things. As a little girl, she would collect fallen flower petals and arrange them in saucers of water, calling them princess bowls. Claire had always loved beautiful things. As a little girl, she would collect fallen flower petals and arrange them in saucers of water, calling them princess bowls. When she was 10, she made a wedding dress for one of her dolls out of tissues and Scotch tape. She had stood in my bedroom doorway, holding it up proudly while Thomas said, "Well, that doll married rich." I almost smiled at the memory. Then I found table 23. It was near the back corner, close to the service doors, where waiters slipped in and out carrying trays. From there, The head table looked small and distant, raised on a platform beneath a floral arch. The reserved family tables were much closer to the front. Patricia and Harold Whitaker's relatives filled two of them, laughing and greeting one another with practiced warmth. My seat was beside a retired co-worker of Harold's, a second cousin of Patricia's from Dayton, and a woman who introduced herself as a friend of the venue coordinator. My seat was beside a retired co-worker of Harold's, a second cousin of Patricia's from Dayton, and a woman who introduced herself as a friend of the venue coordinator. They were polite but confused. I could see it in their faces when I said I was the bride's mother. The bride's mother? The cousin repeated, then looked toward the front tables as if checking whether she had heard correctly. Yes, I said. How lovely, she replied too quickly. I placed my purse carefully on my lap. A mother knows when she is being hidden, not forgotten. Hidden. Claire had not placed me at the back by accident. Seating charts at weddings are not random. They are maps of importance, affection, strategy, and sometimes shame. Mine told me exactly where my daughter wanted me present enough to prove she had a mother distant enough not to disturb the image she had built. I watched guests gather near the bar. I recognized almost no one. The few people from Claire's side were scattered across different tables as if her past had been broken apart and tucked into corners. Then, Patricia Whitaker appeared. She wore a pale silver dress and diamonds at her ears. Her smile was smooth, but her eyes were cold and busy taking inventory. Selena, she said, leaning down just enough to make the greeting look gracious from across the room. You made it. I did. Claire was concerned you might be overwhelmed by the drive. It was fine. Her gaze moved over my dress, my pearls, my hands resting on my purse. You look very nice. Thank you. Not beautiful. Not happy to see you? Very nice. She turned as if to leave, then paused. I imagine this is an emotional day for you. It is. Well, she said, lowering her voice, at least after tonight, everyone can begin fresh. There it was again, fresh, settled, future, words people used when they wanted to bury something still alive. What do you mean by that? I asked. Patricia's smile thinned. Only that change can be healthy, especially at this stage of life. At this stage of life. I felt the envelope in my purse like a heartbeat. Before I could answer, Harold Whitaker stepped beside her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair and the expression of a man who believed rooms should make space for him. Mrs. Hughes, he said, shaking my hand. Big day. Yes. He leaned slightly closer. I hear you're making quite a generous move for the kids. My skin went cold. What move would that be? His eyes shifted to Patricia, then back to me. Well, I don't want to speak out of turn. Please do. A small frown crossed his face. Men like Harold were not used to women my age saying, please do, with steel underneath. He cleared his throat. Just that letting go of a large property can be a relief. Less upkeep, more liquidity, helps the next generation get started. I stared at him. So they knew, or at least they thought they knew. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough that I had to press my feet firmly to the floor. I have not let go of anything I said. Patricia's face tightened. Harold's expression closed. Before either of them could respond, someone called Patricia's name from the front and she seized the excuse. We'll talk later, she said. No, I replied softly. I don't believe we will. They walked away. I sat there for a long moment while the quartet played something gentle and meaningless. Then I saw Claire. She was standing near the entrance to the garden terrace, surrounded by bridesmaids in sage green dresses. Her gown was fitted lace with a long train, her hair swept back beneath a veil that caught the light. She looked stunning, truly stunning. For one painful second, the mother in me rose up with such force that I forgot everything else. My baby. My beautiful, impossible baby. I waited for her to see me. I imagined, still foolishly, that her face might soften. That she might cross the room, hug me, whisper, "Mom, I'm scared," the way she had before every major moment in her life. She did see me. Her eyes met mine from across the room. Then she smiled. Not warmly, not naturally. A small, controlled smile meant for guests, cameras, and anyone watching. She lifted her fingers in a tiny wave, then turned back to one of her bridesmaids. She did not come over. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling. The ceremony took place outside beneath a white floral arch overlooking the golf course. I was escorted to a seat on the bride's side, third row from the back. The front row on Claire's side had a framed photograph of Thomas placed on a chair surrounded by flowers. Seeing it nearly broke me. They had remembered him beautifully. They had placed his picture where everyone could see it. Yet they had placed his wife in the back. That contradiction told me more about the day than any speech could. When Claire walked down the aisle, everyone stood. I stood too, because despite everything, she was still my daughter. Her eyes were fixed on Brandon, who waited at the altar in a black tuxedo, smiling as if the world had arranged itself exactly for him. The vows were lovely, of course they were. Words are easy when no one asks whether you mean them. Brandon promised to protect her dreams. Claire promised to build a future with him. Guests dabbed their eyes. Patricia smiled, Harold nodded. The officiant spoke about two families becoming one. I sat with the white envelope in my purse and wondered whether family meant anything if truth was not invited. After the ceremony, guests moved back inside for cocktails. I stood near a tall window with a glass of water in my hand, watching people laugh beneath the chandeliers. No one knew me well enough to ask why I looked pale. Then I heard Brandon's voice. He was near the hallway that led to the private bar, speaking with two men around his age. He had a drink in one hand, his wedding ring still bright and new. "I'm telling you," one of the men said, laughing, "that was a bold move, man." Brandon chuckled. "Timing is everything." I turned slightly, my body going still. Another man lowered his voice, though not enough. "So it's handled." Brandon glanced around. He did not see me, half hidden behind the tall floral arrangement near the window. "After tonight?" "Yeah," he said. "The old place clears the pressure, pays off the vendor balances, gets us into the new build, and takes care of some debt before it becomes a problem." Debt. My fingers tightened around the water glass. The first man whistled softly. "Claire's mom must really love her." Brandon laughed under his breath. "You have no idea." Something inside me went very quiet. Not calm. Quiet. There is a difference. Calm is peace. Quiet is when pain becomes so sharp it stops making sound. One of the men asked, "She good with all this?" Brandon took a sip of his drink. "She'll be fine. Mothers like that just need to feel appreciated publicly. Claire knows how to frame it." Frame it. Like a campaign. Like a product. Like one of Claire's marketing presentations. I stepped back before they could see me. My heart was pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. I wanted to walk over, throw the water in Brandon's face, demand to know what debt he meant, what balances, what new build, what exactly he had convinced my daughter to do. But Eleanor's voice came back to me. "Do not react too quickly. Let them show what they are doing." So I returned to table 23. Dinner was served. People clinked glasses. Toasts began. The best man joked about Brandon's ambition. Patricia gave a polished speech about family legacy. Harold spoke about responsibility and building the future wisely. Every word sounded like another brick placed on my chest. Claire kept glancing toward me. Not often, just enough, and each time I saw it more clearly. She was waiting. The announcement was coming. I knew it before she ever touched the microphone. Because a daughter who truly wanted to honor her mother would have seated her close enough to be seen. But a daughter who planned to use her mother would keep her far enough away that by the time she stood up, the room would already be applauding. So, I sat at the last table, my purse on my lap, one hand wrapped around the white envelope, and I waited for my daughter to decide how much of herself she was willing to lose. By the time the speeches began, I could feel the room changing, not in a way anyone else would have noticed. The guests were still smiling. The candles still flickered inside their glass cylinders. Waiters still moved smoothly between tables, refilling wine and clearing plates. The band had quieted to a soft instrumental version of an old love song, something sweet enough to make people lean closer to one another. But beneath all that beauty, I felt a current moving. Expectation. Brandon stood first. He tapped his champagne glass with a fork, and the room settled into polite silence. He looked handsome under the warm lights, confident in the effortless way men look when they have spent their lives being believed. Claire sat beside him at the head table, her veil removed, now her face glowing from makeup wine and triumph. My wife Brandon began, and the room applauded. Claire laughed, lowering her eyes like a woman in a movie. I watched her hands. They were resting in her lap, fingers twisting slightly around each other. Nervous. Not bride nervous. Not happy nervous. Something else. Brandon thanked his parents first. He thanked Patricia for her vision herald for teaching him how to build not just wealth, but legacy. That word made half the Whitaker tables nod, as if they had been trained to respond to it. Then he turned toward Claire. She has taught me, he said, that the future belongs to people brave enough to step beyond where they started. People murmured warmly. My stomach tightened. Beyond where they started. That was how they spoke of my home now. Not as the place Claire had been loved, protected, fed, raised, and cherished. A place to step beyond. A place to outgrow. A place to use, then leave behind. Brandon went on about building a life together, about new beginnings, about gratitude for the families that had shaped them. His eyes flicked toward me only once quickly, like a man checking whether a door was still locked. Then the best man spoke. He told jokes about Brandon's ambition, how Brandon could turn a parking lot into a portfolio and a handshake into a deal. People laughed. I did not. Patricia dabbed her eyes during her speech, though no tears ever seemed to fall. She called Claire a graceful addition to the Whitaker family and said she admired how Claire had chosen reinvention over limitation. Reinvention. Limitation. Every speech sounded like it had been written around the same hidden insult. Then the microphone was handed to Claire. The room applauded before she even spoke. For a moment, she stood there smiling, one hand holding the microphone, the other resting lightly on Brandon's shoulder. She looked out at the guests, then down at him, then back across the ballroom. Finally, her eyes found mine. I was sitting at table 23, one hand inside my purse, fingers touching the white envelope. Claire's smile trembled. For one fragile second, I thought she might stop. I thought perhaps she would look at me and remember the kitchen table, the maple tree, her father's hands, the promise she made after his funeral. I thought maybe somewhere inside that lace gown and perfect makeup, my daughter was still there fighting her way back. Then Brandon reached up and touched her wrist. It was a small gesture, barely anything. But Claire took a breath, lifted her chin, and began. I want to thank everyone for being here today, she said. Brandon and I are so overwhelmed by the love in this room. Her voice was smooth, professional. She had always been good at presenting. Even in high school, she could stand in front of a class and make nervousness look like charm. Weddings are about beginnings, she continued. But they're also about the people who helped us reach those beginnings. Polite smiles spread across the room. Claire glanced toward the framed photograph of Thomas near the front. I wish my father were here today. He was a hard-working man, and I know in my heart he would have wanted me to have a life bigger than the one he was able to give me. The word struck me so sharply I almost stood then. A life bigger than the one he was able to give me. Thomas had given her everything he had. Every overtime shift, every repaired bicycle, every tuition payment we could manage. Every night he sat at the kitchen table helping with algebra he barely remembered. Every winter morning he warmed up her car before school. Bigger. The room made soft, sympathetic sounds. Claire pressed her lips together as if holding back tears. I knew that expression. I had seen it when she practiced speeches for work. She knew exactly how to make emotion appear controlled enough to be admired. And my mother, she said, turning slightly toward the back of the room. Now people looked at me. Faces turned one after another until I felt the weight of strangers' eyes settle over my shoulders. My mother has always sacrificed for me, Claire said. She gave up so much so I could have opportunities she never had. That part was true. That was what made the lie coming next so cruel. She taught me that love means letting go when it's time. My heart began to pound. Beside me, the cousin from Dayton smiled warmly, already moved by a story she did not understand. Claire's voice softened. And recently, she made the most generous decision a mother could make. No, my fingers closed around the envelope. She agreed it was time to sell our old family home. The room seemed to disappear around the edges. Claire kept speaking, each word falling like dirt over a grave. That house held so many memories, but Mom understood that memories are meant to bless the future, not trap us in the past. Someone near the front murmured, "Beautiful. Beautiful." She wanted Brandon and me to start our married life without the weight of old struggles, Claire said. Because of her sacrifice, we'll be able to put money toward our new home, settle wedding expenses, and begin this next chapter with stability. Wedding expenses, new home, stability. My life had become a budget line. The ballroom erupted in applause. Not hesitant applause, not confused applause. Full, warm, emotional applause from people who believed they had just heard a touching tribute to maternal love. People raised glasses toward me. Some smiled with tears in their eyes. One woman pressed her hand over her heart as if I had done something noble. I sat frozen. The sound hit me harder than shouting would have. Applause can be cruel when it is given to a lie. At the head table, Brandon smiled broadly. Patricia nodded in approval. Harold lifted his glass as if closing a successful deal. Claire looked at me again, and there it was. Relief. Not guilt. Not fear. Relief. She thought it had worked. She thought the applause had sealed the story. She thought I would sit there humiliated and trapped because what kind of mother would stand up during her daughter's wedding and say, "No, that is not true." For a few seconds, I almost became that mother. The old me rose up trembling and pleading. Don't ruin her day. Don't make a scene. People will stare. Maybe you can handle it later. Maybe she panicked. Maybe Brandon pushed her. Maybe if you stay quiet, you won't lose her completely. Then another voice came quieter, but stronger. A voice that sounded like Thomas in the last days of his life. Tenderness needs protection. Claire was still talking. She gave us what she called her final gift. She said, though I had never said any such thing. And Mom, I just want to say publicly how grateful we are. Publicly. That word snapped something into place. She had chosen the stage. She had chosen the witnesses. She had chosen to wrap theft in gratitude and call silence love. If I said nothing now, the lie would become the memory everyone carried home. If I said nothing now, I would not be protecting Claire. I would be helping her become worse. The applause swelled again. I opened my purse. My hand found the white envelope. For one moment, my fingers shook so badly I could barely grip it. Then I thought of Thomas planting the maple tree, Thomas measuring Claire's height on the doorframe, Thomas in his recliner, weak but determined, telling me the house would protect me. No, I thought, not just the house, the truth. I pushed back my chair. The legs scraped against the floor. It was not a loud sound, but somehow I heard it more clearly than the applause. Maybe others did too, because the woman beside me turned first. Then the man across the table. Then someone at the next table. I stood. The applause began to falter. Claire's smile froze. From across the ballroom, Brandon's eyes narrowed. I held the envelope at my side and began walking toward the stage. Each step felt impossibly long. The room was still clapping in scattered pockets, confused now, unsure whether I was coming forward to accept praise. A few guests smiled encouragingly, thinking perhaps I was about to embrace my daughter, bless the marriage, confirm the beautiful story she had just told. Claire tried to recover. "Mom," she said into the microphone with a small laugh. "You don't have to come up." But I kept walking. The band stopped playing completely. By the time I reached the front of the room, the applause had died. I looked at my daughter in her wedding gown, then at Brandon standing beside her, then at the 200 faces waiting for me to play the part I had been assigned. I held out my hand for the microphone. Claire did not move, so I said calmly enough for the first row to hear, "If you're going to thank me for selling my house, Claire, then I think your guests deserve to know when I agreed to do it." The room went silent. Not quiet. Silent. Claire's face drained of color, and in my hand, the white envelope felt heavier than stone. For a moment, nobody moved. Not Claire. Not Brandon. Not Patricia, with her perfect posture at the front table. Not the guests, who had just been applauding the beautiful lie my daughter had wrapped in lace and candlelight. The microphone remained in Claire's hand. Her fingers had tightened around it so hard her knuckles looked pale. "Mom," she said, and the word came out thin, almost warning. "This really isn't the time." I looked at her wedding dress, the pearls in her ears, the soft veil folded over the back of her chair. I looked at the flowers behind her, the gold-rimmed champagne glasses, the guests waiting for me to behave. Then I said, "You made it the time when you announced my home had been sold." A murmur moved across the ballroom. Claire's eyes darted toward Brandon. He stepped closer, smiling in a way that did not reach his face. "Selena, I think there's been an emotional misunderstanding. Today is about family." I turned to him. "No, Brandon. Today became about my house when my daughter thanked me for giving it away." The smile slipped. A few guests shifted in their seats. Someone near the front whispered, "What's going on?" The band members sat frozen with their instruments in their laps. A waiter holding a tray of champagne stopped near the wall, unsure whether to move or vanish. Claire lowered the microphone slightly and leaned toward me. "Please don't do this," she whispered. Her voice shook, and for 1 second my heart responded the way a mother's heart always does. It reached for her. It wanted to rescue her from the fear on her face. But then I remembered. She had not whispered to me before standing in front of 200 people and telling them I had agreed to sell the house Thomas built. She had not protected me from humiliation. She had created it. So I held out my hand again. "The microphone, Claire." She looked at me as if she could not believe I meant it. Then Patricia Whitaker stood from her seat. "Surely," she said, her voice carrying clearly, "this can be discussed privately." I did not look away from my daughter. "It could have been," I said, "before Claire made it public." The room went even quieter. Harold muttered something under his breath, but no one came to help them. That is the strange thing about public lies. People will applaud them when they sound pretty, but once the truth walks into the room, everyone suddenly becomes very interested in seeing where it goes. Claire's lips trembled. "Mom, I was honoring you." "No," I said. "You were using me." The words landed between us like glass breaking. A small sound came from someone in the room. Maybe shock. Maybe pity. I did not turn to find out. Claire's face flushed red. "That's not fair." "Neither is telling a room full of strangers that I sold my home when I never agreed to sell it." Brandon moved fast then. He reached for the microphone, not quite grabbing it from Claire, but placing his hand over hers. "Okay," he said with a tight laugh, speaking toward the crowd, though he did not yet have control of the mic. Everyone were going to take a short pause. Weddings bring up a lot of emotion, especially when there's been loss in the family. Loss. He was reaching for Thomas now, using my dead husband as a curtain to hide behind. Something in me hardened. I stepped forward and took the microphone from Claire before Brandon could. She let go, not because she wanted to, but because she was too stunned to stop me. The speakers gave a small pop as I brought the microphone close. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "My name is Selena Hughes," I said. "I am Claire's mother, and the house my daughter just spoke about is not an old burden I agreed to give away. It is my home." No one breathed. "It is the home my late husband Thomas Hughes and I bought together outside Columbus. It is the home where we raised Claire. It is the home where her father spent years repairing porches, wiring rooms, planting trees, and building a life for his family." Claire's eyes filled with tears, but I could not tell yet if they were sorrow or fear. "And I want to make something very clear," I continued. "I have never agreed to sell that house." A wave of whispers broke across the room. Brandon said, "Selena?" I lifted one hand without looking at him. "I am not finished." To my surprise, he stopped. Maybe it was the tone of my voice. Maybe it was the fact that every eye in the room had turned toward him. Men like Brandon prefer private control. Public exposure makes them careful. I placed the white envelope on the small table beside the wedding cake display. My hands shook slightly as I opened it, but once the paper was in my hands, the shaking stopped. "This," I said, holding up the document, "is a certificate of trust for the Hughes Family Trust." A few people in the crowd exchanged glances. Legal words have a way of changing the temperature of a room. My husband created this trust before he passed away. The house Claire mentioned is held under that trust. Under its terms, I have the legal right to live in that home for the rest of my life. Claire closed her eyes. Brandon's jaw tightened. "No beneficiary," I said, reading from the highlighted section Eleanor had marked for me, "has the right to sell, transfer mortgage, or otherwise dispose of the property during my lifetime without proper legal authority, trustee confirmation, and my valid written consent." I lowered the paper and looked at Claire. "I have given no such consent." The silence that followed was different from the first silence. The first had been shock. This one was understanding. People began to look at Claire differently. Not with the warm admiration they had offered minutes earlier, but with confusion, discomfort, and the first edge of judgment. I saw it moving from table to table, as surely as wind moves through leaves. Claire took a small step back. "Mom," she whispered. Forgetting the microphone would still catch her voice through mine. "You're humiliating me." I turned to her fully. "No, Claire, I am correcting you." Her face crumpled. That nearly broke me. Not because I regretted telling the truth, but because truth does not stop hurting just because it is necessary. Brandon stepped forward again, forcing a calmer expression. With respect, he said, "Family trust arrangements can be complicated." Claire may have believed I looked at him. Claire may have believed what you told her. His mouth closed. A ripple moved through the room. Patricia stood completely still now, one hand against the back of her chair. Harold had gone pale in a way that made him look older. I turned back to the guests. I did not come here intending to speak about legal documents at my daughter's wedding. I came here hoping to watch her begin an honest marriage. The word honest seemed to strike Claire physically, but when my home was announced as a gift, I never gave when my silence was counted on as permission. I had to stand up. My voice thickened then, and for the first time, I let the pain show. That house is not just money. It is not just land. It is not a stepping stone into someone else's lifestyle. It is where my husband spent his strength. It is where my daughter grew up. It is where I grieved him. It is where I learned how to keep breathing after losing the man I loved. The room blurred, but I kept going. And no one, no daughter, no son-in-law, no wealthy family, no smooth explanation has the right to take that from me and call it love. A woman near the back put her hand over her mouth. Someone else whispered, "Oh my God." Claire was crying now. "Mom, I didn't mean it like that." I wanted to ask how she had meant it, how one means to sell another person's home without permission, how one means to stand in a wedding gown and turn betrayal into applause. Instead, I unfolded Eleanor's written notice and held it up. "My attorney has already notified the title office involved that any transaction concerning my property is unauthorized. If paperwork has been submitted suggesting otherwise, then that paperwork is not valid." Brandon's face changed. Not dramatically. Not enough for everyone to notice. But I noticed. The confidence drained from his eyes replaced by calculation. He knew then that this was not only a mother's objection. This was documented, reported, already in motion. Claire looked at him too, and for the first time all night, I saw uncertainty pass across her face. Not about me, about him. That was when Eleanor Brooks stood. She had been seated quietly at a side table near the middle of the room, dressed in a dark blue suit. Her silver hair neat, her expression calm. I had not seen her expression calm. I had not seen her come in earlier, but there she was, exactly where she had promised she might be if I needed her. Every head turned. She walked toward the stage without hurry. Mrs. Hughes come in earlier, but there she was, exactly where she had promised she might be if I needed her. Every head turned. She walked toward the stage without hurry. "Mrs. Hughes," she said, loud enough for the room to hear. "I can confirm that your statement is accurate." Brandon's eyes widened. Claire's lips parted. Eleanor stopped beside me and faced the ballroom. "My name is Eleanor Brooks. I am the attorney associated with the Hughes Family Trust. The property in question cannot be lawfully sold under the circumstances described here tonight." The guests were no longer whispering. They were listening. Eleanor looked at Claire, then at Brandon. "And if any party has represented otherwise in pending documents that matter, will need to be reviewed very carefully." Brandon said, "This is absurd," but his voice had lost its polish. I looked at my daughter one last time, before handing the microphone back to Eleanor. "No, Brandon," I said quietly. "What's absurd is believing a mother's love means she will let you steal her life in front of an audience." The room stayed silent, and in that silence, the applause Claire had counted on was gone forever. Brandon was the first person to truly lose control, not loudly at first. Men like him do not begin with shouting. They begin with smiles that tighten around the edges, with polite words sharpened into warnings, with one hand raised, as if calming a room they are actually trying to command. "This has gone far enough," he said. He stepped between Claire and Eleanor, not quite blocking my daughter, but close enough that the message was clear. He wanted to control what happened next. Eleanor did not move. Neither did I. The ballroom had become so quiet that I could hear the soft hum of the speakers, the faint clink of a glass being set down somewhere in the back, the rustle of a napkin in someone's nervous hand. Brandon looked at the guests and forced a laugh. "I apologize, everyone. This is obviously a deeply emotional family matter, and grief can make paperwork feel more alarming than it is." Grief. Again. He kept reaching for Thomas' death, as if it were a tool he could pick up and use against me. Eleanor turned her head slowly toward him. "Mr. Whitaker, grief does not create unauthorized real estate transactions." A few guests gasped. Brandon's face tightened. "I didn't say it did." "No," Eleanor replied. "You implied Mrs. Hughes may be confused by emotion. I am clarifying that the issue here is not confusion. The issue is authority." Patricia sat down slowly, as if her knees no longer trusted her. Harold remained standing, his hand wrapped around the stem of his champagne glass. He was watching Brandon now, not with fatherly pride, but with calculation of his own. Claire stood very still beside me. Her tears had stopped falling. Her face looked pale and stunned, like someone waking up in a room they did not remember entering. She glanced from Eleanor to Brandon, then back to me. "Brandon," she whispered. "What does she mean?" He turned on her quickly. "Not now." The sharpness in his voice cut through the room. It was only 2 words, but they showed more than any long confession could have. Claire flinched. I saw it. So did several others. The same bridesmaid who had earlier adjusted Claire's train now covered her mouth with her hand. The best man looked down at his shoes. A woman at Patricia's table leaned toward her husband and whispered something that made him frown. Eleanor took one step forward. "I will say this carefully," she said. "A title office contacted me because documents connected to Mrs. Hughes's property raised concerns. Those documents included references to Claire Hughes and communications involving Brandon Whitaker." Brandon laughed again, but this time it sounded brittle. "Communications? I work in real estate. I ask questions. That is not illegal." "No one said asking questions is illegal," Eleanor said. "Misrepresenting authority may be—" The word illegal did what truth often does in a room full of people pretending not to understand. It stripped away decoration. Suddenly the flowers looked excessive, the candles looked theatrical, the champagne looked untouched. Every beautiful detail became part of the stage where something ugly had finally been named. Brandon's eyes hardened. "You're making accusations without context." "I am stating facts within my knowledge." "You're trying to embarrass us at our wedding." I almost laughed then. Not because anything was funny, but because the hypocrisy was so bold, it briefly became absurd. "Our wedding," I repeated. "Brandon, you and Claire stood here and told everyone my house had been sold to fund your future. You embarrassed yourselves when you built a celebration on a lie." His head snapped toward me. For the first time, the polished mask disappeared entirely. "You don't understand what's at stake," he said. There it was, not sorrow, not apology. Stakes. A deal pressure, money. What exactly is at stake? I asked. His eyes flicked toward Harold, then Patricia, then the men from the hallway I had overheard near the bar. Don't, he said quietly. But the warning was not directed only at me. It was directed at the whole room. Claire saw it too. I could see understanding beginning to form in her eyes, slow and terrible. She turned to him. What debt were you talking about? Brandon's jaw moved. Claire. What debt? He grabbed her elbow. Not hard enough to bruise in front of people, just hard enough to remind her that he expected obedience. Claire looked down at his hand. Then she pulled her arm away. The movement was small, but the room felt it. Brandon's face reddened. You're going to believe them now. I heard you, Claire said. Her voice was shaking. Earlier, I heard part of it. I thought you meant the wedding balances. Because I did. Then why did you say debt before it becomes a problem? More whispers. Harold finally spoke. Brandon, he said, his voice low. What, Brandon? He said, his voice low. What is she talking about? Brandon turned toward his father with a flash of anger that almost immediately became fear. Nothing. Business pressure. Temporary timing issue. Is she talking about... Brandon turned toward his father with a flash of anger that almost immediately became fear. Nothing. Business pressure. Temporary timing issue. Patricia stood again, but more slowly this time. Temporary timing issue, she asked. You told us Claire's mother had agreed to liquidate the property. Liquidate. That word hit me like cold water. I looked at Claire. She looked away. So she had known enough. Maybe not everything. Maybe not the exact debt. Maybe not every document. But enough to repeat the lie. Enough to let them believe my life could be converted into money. Eleanor's voice remained calm. Mrs. Hughes has liquidated nothing, nor has she authorized anyone else to do so. Harold set his champagne glass down with a hard click. Brandon, he said, tell me there were no submitted documents. Brandon did not answer. That silence moved through the room like smoke. Claire stepped back from him. Oh my God, she whispered. Brandon rounded on her. Don't act innocent. The words burst out before he could control them. Claire stared at him. He seemed to realize what he had done, but it was too late. The room had heard. Patricia's face changed from shock to something colder. Not concern for me. Not even concern for Claire. Concern for scandal. What does that mean? She demanded. Brandon dragged a hand through his hair, ruining the perfect shape of it. It means Claire knew we needed options. Claire's mouth opened. You told me it was technically fine, because it would have been fine if your mother had done what you said she would do. The words hung there. What you said she would do. I looked at my daughter. Her face collapsed not into tears this time, but into exposure. Like every layer she had arranged over the truth had been torn away at once. You said I looked at my daughter. Her face collapsed not into tears this time, but into exposure. Like every layer she had arranged over the truth had been torn away at once. You said, Brandon continued, his voice growing harsher. She always gives in when you frame things emotionally. You said if it was public, she wouldn't fight you. A sound came out of me, small and wounded. Claire turned toward me immediately. Mom. I lifted my hand. Not because I did not want to hear her, because I could not bear to hear her yet. There are betrayals the mind understands before the heart accepts them. I had known Claire was involved. I had known she had lied. I had known she had let others believe I had agreed to something I had not. But hearing that sentence spoken aloud, that she had counted on my love as a weakness, felt like being struck in the chest. Eleanor moved closer to me, not touching me, but near enough that I felt less alone. Brandon looked around and realized he had revealed too much. His expression shifted again, searching for the safest exit. "This is being twisted," he said quickly. "Everyone is emotional. Claire and I discussed possibilities. Her mother has been resistant, yes, but the plan was always to get everything properly approved after the wedding." "After the public announcement?" Eleanor asked. He glared at her. She continued. "After guests, family, and your parents had been led to believe Mrs. Hughes had already agreed. After vendors and creditors may have been reassured by expected funds connected to this property." Brandon said nothing. Harold's face had gone stone hard. "Creditors," Patricia whispered. One of Brandon's friends quietly left the room. Then another. I noticed because doors opening and closing sound very different when a room is holding its breath. Claire looked at Brandon as if seeing a stranger. "You told me your father was helping with the balances," she said. "I told you I had it handled. You told me Mom's house would just bridge everything." "My God, Claire, because you said it was basically yours one day anyway." The sentence cracked across the ballroom. "Basically yours one day anyway." There it was, the rotten root beneath every polished word. I stepped toward Claire, and she looked at me like a child waiting for punishment. "My home," I said quietly, "is not your future inheritance while I am still living in it." She covered her mouth. Brandon laughed bitterly. "This is ridiculous. Everyone acts like we were stealing. She's her daughter. Families help each other." Eleanor's voice cut through his. "Help requires consent." I looked at Brandon, then really looked at him. Not as the man my daughter loved, not as the groom in the expensive tuxedo, not as the polished real estate professional who had judged my furniture and my life. I saw him as he was, a frightened, indebted man who had looked at an older widow's home and seen an answer to his own mistakes. A man who had understood Claire's shame, fed it, flattered it, and turned it into leverage. A man who had believed that if he dressed greed in wedding flowers, no one would call it by its name. "You never saw me as a person," I said. He blinked, thrown by the softness of my voice. "You saw an old woman in an old house. You saw equity. You saw a solution." He said nothing, but Thomas saw this day before any of us did. I continued. "That is why the paper exists. Not because he hated our daughter, because he understood that sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who need boundaries most. But Thomas saw this day before any of us did," I continued. "That is why the paper exists. Not because he hated our daughter, because he understood that sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who need boundaries most." Claire began crying again, but Brandon's fear had turned into anger. "Fine," he snapped. "Keep the house. Keep the whole damn shrine. But don't pretend you're doing this for family." The room recoiled. I felt the insult, but it no longer had the power to knock me down. "I am doing it for family," I said. "For the family Thomas and I built. For the woman he left behind. For the daughter who needs to learn that love is not ownership. And for the truth, because truth is the only foundation that will not collapse under you." Harold turned away from Brandon. Patricia sat down as if the weight of the scandal had finally reached her bones. Claire stood alone in her wedding gown, no longer tucked beneath Brandon's arm, no longer protected by applause, no longer framed by the story she had created. Eleanor leaned toward me and said quietly, "That is enough for now." I nodded. It was enough. Not because everything had been answered, but because everything essential had been revealed. The sale was stopped. The lie was broken. Brandon's mask had fallen, and Claire, for the first time that day, looked less like a bride beginning a perfect life and more like a daughter realizing what she had sacrificed to buy it. Claire looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Not younger exactly, not innocent, but smaller, as if the gown, the diamonds, the flowers, and the country club around her had all been borrowed from a life that no longer fit. Minutes before, she had stood beneath chandeliers as a bride admired by everyone in the room. Now she stood there with tear-streaked makeup and trembling hands exposed by the very applause she had tried to use. "Mom," she said again, but this time there was no warning in it, only fear. I did not answer right away. Because what could I say? A mother's heart does not stop loving when it breaks. It keeps beating inside the damage, confused and loyal, still remembering the child, while staring at the adult who caused the wound. Claire turned toward Brandon, as if waiting for him to explain, fix, protect, or at least stand beside her. He did none of those things. Instead, he stepped back. It was not a large movement, maybe only a foot, but everyone near the stage saw it. I saw it. Claire saw it most of all. "Brandon," she whispered. He looked at her with anger thinly covered by panic. "You need to stop talking." Her face changed. Something about those words finally reached a place in her that my pain had not. Maybe she had believed his confidence was strength. Maybe she had mistaken control for leadership. Maybe she had told herself that once they were married, all the pressure, all the strange plans, all the whispered financial talk would become part of a successful life. But standing there in front of everyone, hearing him order her into silence after he had helped lead her into disgrace, Claire began to understand what kind of man she had chosen. "You said it would work," she said. The microphone in Eleanor's hand picked up enough of her voice for the front half of the room to hear. Brandon's eyes flashed. "Do not put this on me." Claire stared at him. "You told me Mom wouldn't fight it. Because you told me she never fights you." That sentence cut through the room like a blade. I felt my breath leave me. Claire looked at me then. Really looked. Not past me, not through me, not at the version of me she had created, the soft widow, the sentimental mother, the woman too embarrassed to speak. She looked at me and saw the cost. I was scared, she said, her voice breaking. I wanted to believe her. God help me, I did. But fear does not excuse betrayal. Fear may explain the path someone took, but it does not erase the footprints. Scared of what I asked. She swallowed hard. Of being stuck. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Claire pressed her hand against the front of her gown as if her chest hurt. Of always being the girl from the ordinary house. The girl whose dad fixed wires and came home dirty. The girl whose mother clipped coupons and wore the same coat for 10 years. I worked so hard to become someone else. The words struck me, but not the way she expected. They did not make me angry first. They made me tired. So deeply tired, because I had spent years proud of what she became, never realizing she had built that pride on shame. "Someone else," I repeated. Claire cried harder. You don't understand what it's like in their world. Because I had spent years proud of what she became, never realizing she had built that pride on shame. Someone else, I repeated. Claire cried harder. You don't understand what it's like in their world. Their world, I said softly. Or Brandon's. She looked toward Patricia and Harold. Patricia's face was unreadable. Harold's jaw was tight. Neither of them stepped forward to comfort her. Claire saw that too. She gave a small, painful laugh. I wanted them to respect me, and selling my home without my consent was how you planned to earn respect. She flinched. I didn't think of it that way. No, I said. You thought of it as something already waiting for you. Her mouth opened, then closed. I took one step closer. You thought because one day, after I'm gone, something might pass to you that meant you had the right to reach into my life while I was still living it. The room was silent again, but this silence was no longer about legal shock. It was emotional now. Personal. The kind of silence people enter when the truth becomes too human to gossip about. Claire wiped her face with shaking fingers. I told myself you didn't need that much space. I closed my eyes for a second. There it was, the sentence beneath all the others. You told yourself I didn't need my own home. She nodded barely. I told myself you were lonely there, that it would be better for you to move somewhere smaller, safer, easier. And when I said no, her chin trembled. I thought you were being stubborn. I looked at her wedding gown, its lace train spilling across the polished floor, like something from a dream. And when I still said no, Claire's voice fell to a whisper. I thought you'd forgive me later. A sound moved through the guests. Not outrage exactly, recognition. There were mothers in that room, fathers, adult children, people who had given too much, and people who had taken too much. That sentence found them all. I thought you'd forgive me later. How many cruel things are done under the protection of imagined forgiveness? Brandon suddenly stepped forward again. This is ridiculous. Claire, you're making it sound worse than it was. She turned toward him slowly. It was worse. His face hardened. No. What's worse is you falling apart instead of thinking. We had a plan. She said. He pointed toward me, then Eleanor. They are turning you against me. No, Claire said, and for the first time that night, her voice held something steady. You are showing me who you are. Brandon laughed bitterly. Who I am. I'm the man trying to build us a life. With my mother's house, with family resources, he snapped. Stop acting like this is some random stranger. It was going to be yours eventually. I stepped in before Claire could answer. Eventually is not ownership. Brandon looked at me with contempt. You're clinging to a shrine. I felt the insult, but Claire reacted first. Don't call it that. He turned on her. Oh, now you care about the house. Claire's face crumpled again. I cared. I just hated what it said about me. And what did it say, I asked. She looked at me, shame flooding her eyes. That I came from people who struggled. I nodded slowly. You did. She lowered her head. And do you know what that struggle gave you? I asked. A warm bed, birthday cakes, school clothes, college application fees, a father who worked until his body ached, a mother who went without things you never noticed missing, a home you could return to every time the world disappointed you. Claire covered her mouth. That house did not embarrass you, I said. It raised you. Her knees seemed to weaken, and one of her bridesmaids rushed forward, catching her elbow. Claire did not push her away. She stood there, supported by a friend, while her husband watched from a distance. That told me everything. Brandon was not ashamed because Claire was hurting. He was angry because she was no longer useful. Patricia approached, then not me, not Claire, but Brandon. Her voice was low but sharp enough to carry. "Is there anything else your father and I should know before our attorney hears about this from someone else?" Brandon's face went pale. "Mom!" "Do not," Patricia said. "Not here. Not here." Even then, her concern was location, reputation, containment, not truth. Harold looked toward Eleanor. "Are you suggesting there may be criminal exposure?" Eleanor's expression remained professional. "I am suggesting any submitted documents should be reviewed by counsel. If signatures, authority, or representations were falsified or misused, consequences may follow." Harold closed his eyes briefly. The word consequences seemed to reach Claire more deeply than anything else. She looked at me. "Mom, am I going to jail?" The question was so childlike, so frightened, that a few people looked away. My first instinct was to go to her, to hold her, to say, "No, baby, of course not." But I could not promise that. And more importantly, I would not teach her again that fear erased responsibility. "I don't know," I said honestly. She sobbed once. "But I know this," I continued. "Whatever happens next will depend on whether you finally tell the truth." Brandon snapped, "Do not say another word, Claire." Claire looked at him, then at me, then at Eleanor. For a moment, I saw the little girl she had been and the woman she had become, standing inside the same body fighting. Finally, she spoke. "I knew Mom hadn't signed anything." Brandon cursed under his breath. The room recoiled. Claire kept going, crying harder now, words tumbling out, as if a dam had broken. I knew she didn't really agree. I knew she kept saying no. Brandon said we could get her to approve it after the wedding, once everyone understood it was the right thing. He said if we framed it as a sacrifice, she wouldn't want to look selfish. Selfish. I almost smiled at the cruelty of it. An old mother defending her own roof would be called selfish by the child trying to take it. Claire turned toward me fully. "I told myself it was temporary. I told myself you'd be okay. I told myself Dad would have wanted me to be secure. That was the one that broke my composure. Do not put this on your father," I said, my voice low. Claire froze. "Your father built that trust because he wanted me secure." She nodded, crying silently now. Around us, the wedding seemed to be collapsing in slow motion. Guests whispered. A few stood and slipped toward the exits. The photographer lowered his camera, unsure if documenting this would be cruel or necessary. The wedding cake remained untouched, 3 perfect tiers of white frosting beside a family coming undone. Brandon moved away from Claire then. Not dramatically, not with a fight. He simply stepped down from the stage and walked toward the side hallway, pulling at his bow tie, as if he could loosen the consequences around his throat. Claire watched him go. "Brandon!" she called. He did not turn around. That was the moment she truly understood. Not when I read the trust, not when Eleanor confirmed the legal truth, not even when he told her to stop talking. It was when he left her standing there alone in the wreckage they had made together. The man she had betrayed me for did not even stay to share the shame. Claire sank into the chair behind her, the train of her gown folding around her like spilled snow. No one applauded now. No one admired her. No one looked at her as the perfect bride who had risen above her past. She was simply my daughter, sitting in public ruin, learning that a life built on betrayal does not become beautiful just because the flowers are expensive. I stood a few feet away, feeling no victory. That surprised me. I had imagined in some hidden, angry corner of my heart that if the truth came out, I might feel relief, satisfaction, justice, maybe even the fierce pleasure of finally being believed. But I felt none of that. I felt sorrow. Sorrow for the house dragged into greed. Sorrow for Thomas's name used to justify shame. Sorrow for the little girl who once promised never to let me be alone there. And sorrow for the woman in the wedding gown who had become so desperate to belong somewhere else that she nearly destroyed the only place where she had always belonged. Eleanor touched my arm gently. "Selena," she said we should go. I looked at Claire. She lifted her face to me, eyes red mouth trembling. "Mom," she whispered, "please." It was not clear what she was asking for. Forgiveness, rescue, permission to fall apart. Maybe all of it. I wanted to give it to her. That was the terrible part. Even after everything, part of me still wanted to gather her up and shield her from every staring face in that room. But love, I was learning, had to grow a backbone, or it became a doorway for harm. So I said the hardest sentence I had ever said to my child. "I love you, Claire. But I will not save you from the truth tonight." Then I turned and walked away with Eleanor beside me, leaving my daughter in her wedding dress, surrounded by the silence her own lie had created. Eleanor and I left through a side hallway instead of walking back through the ballroom. Behind us, the wedding continued to fall apart in pieces. I heard voices, rising chairs, scraping, someone calling Brandon's name, someone else asking where the photographer had gone. There was no music anymore, no laughter, no cheerful clinking of glasses. Just the low, broken noise of a room trying to decide whether it had witnessed a family argument, a legal disaster, or the end of a marriage before it had even begun. My legs felt strangely steady until we reached the lobby. Then my knees weakened. Eleanor took my elbow without making a show of it. "Sit for a moment," she said. "I am fine. You are not fine. You are standing, which is different." I almost laughed, but it came out like a breath. She guided me to a small sofa near the coat room. A young employee nearby pretended not to watch us. I could not blame her. If I had been her age, I would not have known where to look either. For several minutes, I said nothing. I stared at the marble floor and listened to the muffled chaos behind the ballroom doors. My daughter was in there in her wedding gown. My only child. The girl whose fever I had cooled with damp cloths, whose lunch boxes I had packed, whose prom dress I had hemmed by hand the night before because the tailor had measured it wrong. And I had walked away from her. I knew I had done the right thing. That did not make it feel clean. Eleanor sat beside me, silent and patient. Finally, I whispered, "Thomas would hate this." Eleanor folded her hands over her purse. "Thomas would hate what happened to you. He would hate seeing Claire like that." "Yes," she said, "he would. But he would not have asked you to disappear so she could avoid shame." I closed my eyes. That was the part I had to keep remembering. I had not created Claire's shame. I had only refused to carry it for her. A few minutes later, we stepped outside. The night air was cool. The country club lawn glowed beneath discreet landscape lights, and the white tents looked ghostly against the dark. The beauty of it all felt cruel now. A perfect venue for an imperfect truth. Eleanor walked me to my car. "Do not answer calls tonight unless they are from me," she said. "No calls from Claire. No calls from Brandon. No Whitakers. No emotional negotiations in the dark. She may need me." "She may," Eleanor said gently. "But need is not the same as entitlement. Tonight, you need safety and quiet." I looked back at the building. What happens now? Legally, I will follow up with the title office first thing Monday morning. I will send formal notices to all relevant parties. If there were improper documents, we preserve them. If signatures were falsified or authority was misrepresented, we address that through the proper channels. And Claire, Eleanor's face softened. Claire will have to decide whether to tell the truth fully or keep protecting the lie. I nodded through the words hurt. On the drive back to Columbus, I kept both hands on the wheel. The highway stretched dark in front of me, headlights passing like silent witnesses. My phone buzzed again and again inside my purse. I did not look. At first, the buzzing felt urgent. Then it felt desperate. Then it felt like a test. By the time I pulled into my driveway, there were 17 missed calls. 6 from Claire, 4 from a number I did not know, 3 from Brandon, 2 from Patricia Whitaker, 2 from Claire again using what looked like a bridesmaid's phone. There were messages too, but I did not listen. I sat in the car and looked at my house. The porch light was on. The maple tree stood dark and steady over the front yard. The upstairs window of Claire's old room caught a thin reflection of moonlight. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The silence of the house met me like an embrace, not the cold silence of the wedding after the truth broke open. This was different. This was the silence of walls that knew me, floors that had carried my grief, rooms that had not judged me when I cried in them. I set my purse on the kitchen table and took out the white envelope. Then I took out Claire's wedding card, the one with the watercolor tree, the one I never gave her. May the life you build be honest enough to stand on. I read the sentence again and pressed my hand over my mouth. Then I placed the card in a drawer. Not because I no longer meant it, because she was not ready to receive it. The next days were quieter than I expected and louder than I feared. Quiet inside my house, loud everywhere else. Eleanor called Monday morning to tell me the title office had officially stopped the transaction review. No sale could proceed. No transfer could move forward. Any file related to the property had been flagged as disputed and unauthorized. The house was safe. Those words should have filled me with relief. They did partly, but grief has a way of sitting beside relief and refusing to leave. Eleanor also sent written notice to Brandon Claire and any parties connected with the attempted transaction. She told me not to speculate, not to threaten, not to respond emotionally. Evidence mattered now. Timelines mattered. Who said what? Who submitted what? Who signed what? Who knew what? It was strange to hear my family reduced to documents. But then again, they had reduced my home to money first. By Tuesday, Brandon had moved out of the apartment he and Claire were supposed to share after the honeymoon. There was no honeymoon. Someone I never learned who told Eleanor that Brandon had gone to stay with a friend near Cincinnati and had hired a lawyer before he even called Claire back. That detail told me everything. A man who truly loved his wife would have stayed to face the wreckage. Brandon protected himself first. The Whitakers moved quickly too. Harold's attorney contacted Eleanor not to apologize, but to clarify that Harold and Patricia had no knowledge of any unauthorized conduct. Patricia sent Claire a short message according to what Claire later told me, saying the family needed distance until legal exposure was understood. Legal exposure. Not heartbreak. Not wrongdoing. Exposure. Claire was left with the wedding bill, a stained reputation, a husband who had disappeared, and the first real consequences of a life she had tried to build on someone else's sacrifice. For 3 days, I did not speak to her. She called. She texted. She left voicemails that I listened to only after Eleanor told me it was safe to preserve them, but not engage. The first messages were frantic. "Mom, please call me. Mom, I don't know what to do. Mom, Brandon won't answer. Then came the defensive ones. You didn't have to do it like that. You could have talked to me privately. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. I almost answered that one. I typed, you embarrassed yourself when you lied. Then I deleted it. By the fourth day, the messages changed. I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. I keep hearing what you said about Dad. I don't know who I became. That last one made me sit down. Because I did know. She had become someone afraid of being ordinary. Someone ashamed of the very love that raised her. Someone who let ambition make her cruel because cruelty looked like confidence when Brandon stood beside her. I still did not call. Not yet. Instead, I walked through my house. I moved room to room, not as a woman checking what she might lose, but as a woman reminding herself what remained. In the kitchen, I touched the burn mark on the table. In the hallway, I traced Claire's height marks with one finger. In Thomas's study, I locked the file drawer for the first time in years. Then I called a locksmith. Changing the locks felt dramatic, almost harsh. But the man who came to do it was gentle. He was in his 50s, with a graying beard and kind eyes. He did not ask questions when I said I needed all exterior locks changed and 2 interior locks added to the study and basement file cabinet. When he finished, he handed me the new keys. Peace of mind, he said. I held them in my palm and nodded. Yes. Peace of mind has weight. It sounds like metal keys clicking against one another. That afternoon, I updated my emergency contacts. I moved certain documents to a safe deposit box. Eleanor helped me add stronger written instructions to the trust file, making clear no one was to discuss property matters with Claire or anyone claiming to represent her without direct confirmation from me and Eleanor. Each step hurt. Each step healed. By Saturday, the house felt different. Not unsafe, just changed. Betrayal had entered it, not through a broken window or a forced lock, but through the hands of someone who once had every right to come inside. That is the kind of violation people do not understand unless they have lived it. The home was still mine, but innocence had left. Late that afternoon, I was watering the lavender along the walkway when a car stopped in front of the house. I knew it was Claire before I looked up. A mother knows the sound of her child arriving even after the child has broken her heart. She stepped out slowly. No makeup, no styled hair, no polished coat. She wore jeans, a gray sweatshirt, and the exhausted face of someone who had not slept well in days. For a second, I saw the wedding gown layered over her, the ruined bride on the stage. Then I saw the little girl who used to run barefoot across the same lawn. Claire walked up the driveway and stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. Mom, she said. I stood with the hose in my hand, water spilling softly onto the grass. She looked at the front door, then at me. Maybe she noticed the new lock. Maybe she understood. I know I don't have the right to ask to come in, she said. I turned off the water. The yard went quiet, except for birds in the maple tree. She was crying already, but not dramatically. Tears simply moved down her face as if she had run out of energy to stop them. Brandon left, she said. I know. His lawyer called me before he did. That hurt me for her, even though I did not want it to. Claire swallowed. The Whitakers won't talk to me except through attorneys. The venue is asking about payments. Eleanor sent documents. I may need my own lawyer. You probably do. She flinched slightly at my calmness. I deserve that, she whispered. I did not say yes. I did not say no. She looked up at the maple tree. Dad planted this when I was born. Yes, I forgot that. No, I said. You remembered. You just decided it mattered less than what you wanted. Her face crumpled, but she did not defend herself. That was the first honest thing she gave me. I walked up the porch steps and opened the front door. Claire took one step forward, hope rising in her face like a child seeing a light turn on. I held up my hand. "You may come in," I said, "but not as the daughter who thinks she owns me." She stopped. The words entered her slowly. Then she nodded, tears falling harder now. "I understand." I was not sure she did. Not yet. But she had heard me, and for that day hearing was enough.